Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Welcome back, and today I am going to be starting a project that I've been dreaming about for the last 2 nights. Literally, in my mind, I've been working through processes for this when I wake up in the morning. It's crazy. And it's from this pattern, okay? It's a jacket, not this one. I can't imagine wanting to have a big fan sticking right out at the widest part of my rear. I can't do that. The one I'm going to be doing, it's not even shown on the front. It's basically with a circular cut peplum, but it's this length, okay? And they show it on the back of the pattern here, down here, okay? That's the one I'm going to be doing. And let me tell you the whole story on how this came about, because, you know, I was sitting on the sofa at night searching vintage sewing on eBay, and I found this, which is a bound buttonhole maker. And I was intrigued, so I bought it. And when it came, I figured out how to use it. I was like, oh, I must use this on a project. So then I'm searching through my current patterns to find something that could use a bound buttonhole. And this is what came up, okay? And as I got to look at it, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this jacket with the long peplum really reminds me of a Jessica McClintock suit pattern that I had in the late 80s, and I love that. I had like 3 versions of it that I made, and I'd wear them to the office, and I just felt fabulous, and it had the big long peplum bottom and everything. So I'm hoping this turns out well. Now, the fabric that I'm going to be using is a very nice wool suiting fabric. Let me see if I can pull it up. It's dark. It's got a little plaid worked into it, you know, kind of gray, a little bit of brown. It's just dark. And so because these plaids are very small, I'm not going to focus terribly much on matching the plaids, you know, because you'll see I have seams going all over the place. But I did pre-shrink my wool. And what I did is I serged the edges of it, put it in my dryer. I couldn't remember the word for dryer. Put it in my dryer and got a big bath towel and just soaked my bath towel until it was drippy wet. Put that in there with it and just tumble it until they were both dry. And that, actually, I can tell the texture changed and everything, so I feel pretty confident that this is going to be nice. This is a fairly lightweight wool. See if you can see. It's a fairly lightweight wool, kind of drapey and everything, which is good, because I want it to lay nicely. So because this is a jacket and I am using the nice wool, I am going to be using a slightly different technique than in the pattern, just slightly. I'm not going to go full-blown tailoring. There's like 3 levels of tailoring. There's custom, where everything is pad stitched by hand. There's the machine version, where the pad stitching and all that is done by machine. And then there's the fusible interface version. And that's what I'm going to do, because I think that that's the most user-friendly for all of us at home and everything. So it still has a very nice finish, a very nice lay and everything. So we're going to do that. So the first thing I did is actually last night I cut the pattern pieces out of the tissue paper. Got to looking at it, and there are a few modifications I'm going to be making, just because, you know, my body is not this body. Okay, so for the pattern mods, my main issues, as usual, are going to be my upper arm, because thick, and my bust, because patterns in general are made for a B cup, and I am bigger than a B cup. So although based on my neck size, my shoulder size, my waist and hips and everything, a 16 in general fits me very well. For something that is very fitted and tailored, I need to make sure I make those adjustments, because otherwise it's going to be too snug. And for my bust, my actual bust is the size of the finished bust on this design. And you should have about 3 inches of ease worked in there at least. So I'm going to need to add, excuse me, 3 inches of ease to the bust, but mostly in the front, because the back and that whole bust area is fine. It's just the front. So I'm going to work on that, and I'm going to work on the arms. Okay, so I put my camera up on the ceiling because I think you might be able to see a little bit better. I've got my pivot and slide board. Basically, I'll zoom out later. This is just a big art canvas board from a craft store. It's like a 36 by 36 inch size. And then I put a layer of fleece over it, and then this is just some brown craft paper to protect it so things don't bleed through. So first, working on the front. And if you're curious, I got this method that I'm going to be using from my Bishop method book, because I was trying to figure out what's the least invasive way to make all of this. And I really like this idea. So this is my front. And like I said, my actual size bust and the bust sizes of the pattern are written here. I just realized I need to lower this apex also. So I'm going to be doing 2 things to this. So by the time I'm done, this has going to have tape all over it, but that's okay. So there's 2 steps I need to do to this. I need to lower the apex, you know, as you do because of gravity, and I do that 1 inch, which is the standard that I do because at this point, pattern companies have a standard size, and my standard size is 1 inch lower than their standard size. So I just go with that. But I want to make sure that the top of my dart ends 1 inch lower. So I've done this before, but you know, it's always good to repeat. What I'm going to do first is line up the straight of grain of my pattern with the grain on my board. Let me wind you out a bit so you can see that. Okay, so I have a grid that's going this way, so I'm lining up on this pattern piece. It is the center front line that I need to get going straight up with that. So I need to lower this. This part is okay at this point. This part is okay at this point. It's just this. So usually I cut up and all the way over. But I'm thinking that since there is no side dart, and I'm going to be changing this outside seam anyway, I'm actually just going to cut a little rectangle this way. So I've got my little ruler, and as long as I am above that point, I'm good. So I'm going to draw a line. I don't want to mess with these buttonholes or anything, so I'm going to start my line right about here and go past where that dart is, probably to this straight of grain line here. Okay, so I have this line drawn in, and then I'm going to follow that straight of grain line that I did not see earlier for some reason, all the way down here, and again following it here all the way down. Okay, so now I need to cut this out. I'm just gonna put a little piece of tape on the bottom of each one of these just to hold it in place, so at this point it is where it should be. Now if I'm going to lower this by 1 inch somewhere along about the midpoint of this dart, doesn't have to be exact because I'm going to be redrawing the lines anyway. What I need to do is put my ruler down and fold this down so that the fold line is at the 1/2 inch mark on my ruler, like this, because 1/2 inch plus 1/2 inch is 1 inch, and that's what I need to lower it by. Okay, so now I can go ahead and tape this in place. Okay, and I'm going to get a little piece of tracing paper to put in the middle just to hold that, so that it's going to not want to shift anywhere. All right, so I just cut a little piece of my tissue paper, and I am taping it over here so that everything will stay where it should for right now. I do one more in the middle. Okay, so now I will be redrawing these legs. I'm not doing it right at this second. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my extra width. Okay, so here's the main difference from how I usually do pivot and slide, which is balanced on both sides. I'm only doing it on the front side. The sleeve has 1 notch on the front, 2 notches on the back. I'm only dealing with the front side. And that's because if I extend this part here, in order to get that seam line to line up going up the side of the bodice into the sleeve, I have to add it all here. You know, it's going to work out. Not really worried about that. So again, what I'm going to do, and try to keep my head out of the camera, is just stick a couple little pins here to hold it still while I get my bearings on where everything is. So out here at a point that where this bullseye comes across, which is about, you know, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, whatever, down from the cut edge up here, at that point I'm going to be adding my 1.5 inches that I put over here. So I'm just going to draw a little line there with my pencil just so I can see where that point is. So now down here at the bottom, I want my cuff to stay the same size. So I wrote a little angle here, and I'm sticking my pin down towards the corner of my pattern. So before I go moving it too much with my pencil, I'm just going to draw that angle and draw probably about 6 inches down this side, just so I can see where I am, okay? So I need to rotate this out until, remember this pin down here is acting like a pivot point, until this point about 3/4 of an inch or so down, which is in level with that, is hitting this mark that I drew out here. And that is pretty close. So I'm going to stick a pin back there to hold it in place, okay? So now, get my blue marker. I'm going to draw this point here, follow it all the way down. Okay, so now that I have that drawn, I'm going to pull my pin out and pull this pattern back to where it started out. Now this is the point here that is going to be where this gets sewn to it. So I need to double check and make sure it's the same size, and it is. So now I can just connect those two like that. And that's my new side. So again, I'm going to use my Scotch tape. Come and tape all of this together here. I think I drew all over my fingers with that Sharpie. And down here in the corner. Okay, and again, well, I can kind of see because that pattern's right there, but this is where my new notch is going to be. So I'm good. So now I just cut this out along the blue line, and I have my new sleeve piece that has 1.5 inches built into it. And remember, I needed to add, well, I want to add about 3 inches of these. So the amount that I put on here and the amount I put on here is going to balance out. So yay, win-win. Okay, so I have all of my wool pieces cut out. This is it. It's lovely. I'm not cutting out my lining until after I have my whole wool sewn together, so that if there's any changes I need to make, I can make it before. And so the first thing I'm actually going to work on is my undercollar. And the idea is, if you do this little piece first out of your fabric with whatever technique you're going to do, you can learn about all the ins and outs of how the fabric is going to work and stretch and mold and whatever before you're working with the big pieces. Plus, you know, it needs to get done, so it needs to get done. Now this piece, it's cut on a bias. There are 2 of them. All right, and they get sewn together up the back, which adds support. The upper collar, the one that's more visible, is cut on the fold, okay? So we're working on the one that is 2 pieces that are going to be sewn together. This is the pattern piece, and they don't give you a fold line. So I'm going to have to draw my own fold line, and you'll see why. This part of what I'm doing here is not in the instructions, but it is part of the method that I'm going to be using. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw all over this by drawing in all of my seam allowances. And I can tell based on the dot placement here and here that this is a 5/8 inch seam allowance that they're calling for. Basically, because I cut out 16, so here it is. There's 5/8 from the center of this to there and the center of this to there. So that's how I can tell that's what it's going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and draw lines all the way around at 5/8 of an inch first. Okay, so I have my seam allowances drawn here. Now the next thing I need to draw is the roll line. Now, here's my cam. See if I can explain this. This goes under the collar around your neck. So you know your collar folds like this and comes around, so let me bring you up. Okay, so around the front it'll look like that. So they don't have it drawn on. A lot of times for the blazer, jacket, whatever patterns, they'll have a line drawn right here. So I'm going to have to guess. Usually it's about halfway in between here is where the starting point is. I don't know where my pin's not working. Okay, so I'm just going to start it there, and then where it curves up right here, it usually terminates a little less than halfway between those points. So if I lay this flat here, I can see it. It's probably going to be right around here. And this is just a guess at this point. Usually if you have a notch, it's past that notch. So what I'm going to do is just roughly draw this in. See if you can see how I drew this line starting halfway here, pretty much coming straight across. And you want this part to be pretty much equal on both sides. So if this is my fold line, then let's see how it would work. If I fold it up on here, and the only reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to be interfacing underneath the fold line differently than above it. Okay, so if this is my fold line and it comes around, will that work? And I think it will. I'm going to go with that, you know. So I'm just going to, with my pen, come back and draw this line a little bit darker because I need to cut one of these out in my interfacing. So what I need to do first is I need to choose the interfacing that I'm going to use for this. So before I actually cut everything out, I'm going to use 3 different little samples of fabric and a scrap that I have left over from when I was cutting out. And let me separate that. So what I'm going to be trying is my regular old extremely lightweight interfacing, my it's called featherweight, slightly crisper of a black Peplum interfacing, and this is a knit. And I know it seems odd to use it, but sometimes it works nice for large pieces. And it's this one, this Knit and Stable. So I'm going to fuse that on over here. So just to see what they all do. So I am going to try to be careful and fuse it extremely well with lots of steam so I have a good adhering quality to it, and I will be right back. First, let's start with the hardest one, the crispest one, which is this black, And I don't know if you can tell, it will hold its own. I can hold it up and it's sturdy enough that it can hold a crispy little edge. So if I am doing something that needs a very crisp edge to it, this is the one I'm going to use, okay? Something that needs to be able to have structure to hold up to itself. That's what I'm going to use. This one, which is my standard basic Peplum, the very, very lightweight stuff, it does its job. What its job is to do is to keep things in place. It's going to hold the straight of grain straight, the cross grain cross. It's not going to have any flexibility this way, really. I mean, I can really stretch it, but then I'll pop it. This is what I'm going to be using to cover the entire inside of that front piece, which you have not seen yet, but just trust me, I will. This, which is the knit, it drapes lovely. I mean, it's extremely lightweight, but what I like about it is it has a nice soft roll. What it will also do is it has some flex. So if there's something on a bias that might need to roll, like this point right here, this might be a good thing to use there, you know, because it will roll nicely at the top. This one, yeah, it will, but it might put a crease, okay? This one here, you're not going to get that crease, or at least not as defined, you know? They're just different purposes for different things. So what I'm going to be doing is cutting a piece out of my black crisper one for this part right here, okay? I need to make a separate pattern piece for that. Change my mind. I've decided I'm not going to be using this, even though it does work lovely on the bias. I need something with just slightly more body for this. I don't want this to have a super crazy, hard, cardboardy kind of collar. I want it to be lovely, but I want it to hold its shape. So there's going to be two different pieces of interfacing. Out of my regular lightweight interfacing, I'm going to cut basically the entire piece. Out of this one, I'm going to be cutting this piece. So just to make my life easier, I'm just putting a piece of my tracing paper on here so I can make a separate pattern piece that I can use to cut out this piece. So I'm going to cut two of those for my black. Now I am drawing this out without the seam allowance because I need to cut this piece on a fold. Okay, so I'm just going to have one of these, one big long one, but it is going to be on a fold. Okay, so of the very lightweight, and in case you haven't seen it before, this is the one I'm talking about when I say very, very lightweight. Okay, it basically has no weight to it at all. It's lovely, useful stuff. Okay, I cut two of these. All right, and because it is so ultra lightweight, I'm cutting the whole thing. If I desired to have a stiffer, sturdier, more structured collar, and I was cutting everything out of this, I would not cut the seam allowances. I would take those out. But since what I'm doing here is so lightweight, it doesn't matter to me. So put this aside, put my scraps aside, get these pieces. The first thing I'm going to do is go over to my ironing board and fuse a piece of interfacing onto each one of these. For pressing this, I just wanted to show you why I like to do these little pieces first, is because you get a really good idea of how it's going to react to everything. And I am pressing without a press cloth, which, you know, horrifies a lot of people, but I've got this protective plate on my iron. I've got steam. I don't really feel like I need it. And while I was playing with my scraps, I could tell that when I flip it over and I iron it, I don't get shine in everything, which is good. You know, you want to make sure you're not going to shine up your wool first. If you're playing with your scraps and you do get shininess, definitely use a press cloth. The best one that people say is if you're using wool, use a scrap of the same wool to be your press cloth. I'm fine, so I don't need to, you know. So when I'm ironing my interfacing on, I'm use steam, you know. I put it down, press, and count to about 10. And I'm trying to be really diligent on these, okay? And then move it down. I'm not moving my iron back and forth. I am just pressing straight down. Hello, Midna. I'm on her ironing board, so. Okay, so now that I have it pressed on, okay, I can flip it over and iron this side just to make sure everything's on securely. Okay. So before I put this piece on, this little extra black one, I need to sew these together. So let me put them right sides together. I'm going to sew up this seam right here at 5/8 of an inch. Alrighty, back over here. I'm just going to press that seam to get it all set in nicely with my pinking shears. If you don't have pinking shears, you can use regular shears. Trim down this seam allowance to about 1/4 inch or so. Open it up and press it open. Okay. Let me flip that over and press it again from this side. And again, this is the underside of the collar, so. All right, so now if I put my pattern piece over here, I can make sure what side this goes on and that it's shaped correctly. So I can take these pins out, open it up, and I need to place it where I cut it. So I'm making the fold line where I had it folded on the seam line there, placing it so that I have a seam allowance about on each side here. If I lay this on top of it, I should be able to get it to pretty much match in that spot. Okay, I'm just going to press one side at a time, I think. On this side, I'm not pressing the very center yet, just these sides. So now I'm going to come over here. On this side, line this up with the edge and put this where it needs to be. If it's not picture perfect exact, that's okay. Okay. Now I can flatten this whole thing out here in the middle and press the center. Now before I go away, I need to get my pressing ham back over here because we're going to form this on the ham. So now that I have this piece on, I need to fold it at the top there. So that's going to be my fold line, and wrap it around. And I think my ham is too thick for a neckline, but that's okay. Let me center this in the back here. That might help me. I'm going to put it up on top. I have a smaller neck on the top of this thing. So folding it again at the top of that fold line, I'm going to bring it around here, pin it in place there. This side, bring it around here, and pin it over here. And I'm going to steam it and try to set this curve here. If I had a skinnier ham that was more the size of my neck, this would look a lot more natural. I don't want to move this until it's completely cool and completely dry. So I just filmed something and realized my microphone was off. So I'm going to try to re-show you what I did before when I had no volume. Basically, I'm dealing with my front piece. Okay, this is when we did all of these pattern modifications too before. But before I can deal with this, I have to deal with interfacing. This is not in the instructions, what I am doing right now. Just to let you know, this is extra. I am going to use my very light interfacing again. This one, okay, that one there, that's what I'm using, to interface the entire front piece. But before I do that, I needed to draw some things on my pattern. First of all, remember we lowered this point, so I needed to draw those legs where those are going to be. And I basically just started from the point I had to their existing leg point down here and just drew straight lines, okay? I probably should have done it in a different color because it's blue on blue, but you know. The other thing is I drew in this fold line. This pattern does not have a fold line printed on it because you don't need it unless you do this method. So since I need this method, here it is. And I was able to base my fold line off of the diagram here where it looks like it starts, which looks like a few inches above the top button. And here's my top button, okay? And it should coincide with this fold line. So here's a notch on this undercollar piece, and if I match that up with the notch here, there it goes, all right. As it rolls in, these 2 points will intersect, okay? So that when that is up, it will continue that way. So what I can say is if you have this one done already, place it on here, figure out at what point this line is going to intersect over here and draw it. And that's what I put a little point right there. So I could draw a line from that point to somewhere about 3 inches or so above the top button, again basing that on this. And I also want it to be in line with up here, okay? And that's a general plan for where a fold line is going to be. And that fold line will be at the point where this lapel is going to fold over, all right? So with all of that done now, what I did is I cut out 2 pieces of my interfacing, and they are pinned here at the moment. And I need to make a couple clips to it. So what I'm going to do is put a couple pins over here, fold this back at the fold line, which will give me a cutting line because I am going to slice this. Save these pieces. I still need them. I just need a slice here because I'm going to be putting them on separately. Okay, so now I have these pieces. Saving them, sticking a pin in it so I don't think they're scraps, okay? Also, down here, I need to cut out everything inside these legs, okay? And I don't want to just chop up my pattern because I still might need that. So what I'm going to do is get my marking things. Stick this underneath here and punch out the circle, making sure I don't punch through my fabric. Here, punch out that circle and this circle. And that will give me points that I can then draw through with my heat erasable pen. Come on. Open this up. Draw these lines like this. And now I need to draw this on one side because I can cut through both the layers at the same time. And then cut this out. This isn't super critical for the interfacing I'm using because it is very lightweight. If I was using anything thicker than this, this would definitely be a lot more critical because you don't want interfacing where your darts are. Okay. With that, let me go over to the ironing board. All right, I just moved my stand for my camera over here. So let's hope this works a little bit better. I had to bolt it to my window frame, but we shall see. So the first thing I did is I just lightly ironed this piece just to get it nice and flat, get it settled, all the wrinkles out that might want to be there. Then I'm going to take my large piece of interfacing and carefully match up corners here. If it looks like something's not lining up exactly, I'm moving my fabric to match up with the interfacing. Okay, but this is actually lining up really well. So just like when I'm fusing interfacing to something else, I'm just going to hold it steady in one place, lift up the iron, put it down, hit the steam, hold it steady again, you know, and so on and so forth. I will be back to you when I have this whole thing fused on. All right, now that I have all of this fused on, I need to deal with my little piece here. And I want to give myself a little less than 1/4 of an inch gap here, okay? So I'm just gonna place it. It's a little off the edge up here because I shifted it, and go ahead and just fuse this piece on. So now, since there is no interfacing right here, that's where it's going to want to naturally roll to, okay? There's one more thing we're gonna do just to stabilize this a little bit more. What I'm gonna be doing next is stabilizing this. I know we have some light interfacing on it, but just to stabilize it even more, so it will have nice strength, is I'm gonna be putting a piece of twill tape on here. And I am using plain old 1/4 inch twill tape. I think this is actually a polyester tape. Yeah, it's polyester tape, so it's not going to shrink, but it will not stretch. And that's what I want it for. So I'm going to cut a piece that is roughly the size that I need and just pin it here really quickly. Now up here, I don't want my twill tape to be in the seam allowance. So I am going to mark where that 5/8 inch point is, you know, using my piece O tape as I do, and clip my stay tape along that line. Okay, so that's not in the seam allowance there. And then down here, I don't actually want it to come all the way to the end. At this point, where's my ruler? Okay, at this point here is my seam allowance, all right? And I want it to be able to turn as soon as it hits that seam allowance. So actually a little bit more. I'm drawing it just outside the 5/8 inch mark on that side. And I'm going to clip that. And I will do this for the other side too. And you can either machine stitch it very carefully with a matching thread or whip stitch it. And that is what I am going to do, because I think I'll be able to get my stitches a lot more invisible if I just whip stitch it down. So I'm lining up the edge of my tape here pretty much with the edge of that interfacing underneath. So basically, I am just, you know, catching a thread or so and whip stitching this on up and down each side, just like this. Pull that pin out, don't need her anymore, come on. Just getting enough of that side of my tape to hold it and enough thread from my fabric to make a secure stitch, okay? So when I'm done, it's gonna look like this pretty much. You know, you can do your own stitching. It probably will look a lot neater. Since it's not visible, I'm not really being too stressful about it, but you can see it's already wanting to fold really easily right there. That's what I want. So this is going to be the outside of my jacket, and so I'm setting it all up so that this is a super secure place here, and that is going to be its natural fold line. That's what all of this is about here. Okay, new day, new sleeves, you know. There's one more thing I need to do with these pieces here. This one I have not sewn the dart on. I will do that soon. But it is, there's a separate panel of interfacing. Let me move you back here. That's going to go right here. And what that does is sometimes in this space, like right here, between the shoulder and the bust, it can kind of sink in. And what this is going to do is reinforce that so you have a nice smooth line from the shoulder all the way to the bust, that you don't have any dipping or anything like that. It is actually called a shoulder reinforcement. So there you go. Now, of course, this pattern does not have it. Doesn't mean you can't do it. And I am going to just draw it on. I want to show you step by step how I do it. First of all, it's going to be another piece of fusible interfacing that I'm just fusing on top of this other interfacing, okay? But to get my pattern, I need to start drawing. I don't want this interfacing to be in my seam allowance, so I cut it slightly smaller. So I have a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to cut this so it is 3/4 inches from the sides here and here. That way I know that it's 1/8 of an inch in, everything's going to be good. So that's my first step, is I got my little ruler here, setting it to 3/4 of an inch, and I'm just going to draw several little lines so I can get that position marked. Now you come down about 2/3 of the way down your armhole, okay? So if this distance here is a certain, and I'm just eyeballing it, it's not exact, you know, right about here, for on this pattern, it's just above where the notches are. That's where I'm going to be taking it. So at this point is where I'm going to draw my line to have it stop. So let me go ahead and mark all the way across here at 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so I have this line 3/4 of an inch in, this line 3/4 of an inch in. From here coming down, I'm going to actually have it also 3/4, but I'm not drawing that in my marker yet because I need to draw a line that's a 1/2 inch in from my roll line, which is the blue one there. So I'm just going to draw a line here, 1/2 inch in, okay? And that's going to tell me where this line needs to stop. So if I continue doing 3/4 of an inch till I hit that line I just drew, it's right there. So now I can get my marker and draw this, okay? Now remember we decided that this is the 2/3 of the way down here that I'm stopping this line at. I'm going to draw a line, excuse me, straight across, and I can use my straight of green kind of here to line it up. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want it like really outlandish, you know what I mean? So I'm going to line that up, and with my pencil, draw it straight across to this point, right? Now, we don't want a very sharp curve here. You need to round that out. So I'm just going to grab something that's a little too big. That might work. Something to round that out, you know, so that there's not a sharp point. So now I have this point here, and I can finish drawing my piece. I'm just going to come here, up here, and up here. Okay, so that is going to be my shoulder reinforcement piece. And just like before, if I want to make a separate pattern, so then I can use that to cut out my piece of interfacing, I'm just going to roughly fast trace it onto a piece of tracing paper here, and then cut out 2 pieces of interfacing. Okay, so I just made a little scrap here where I fused 1 layer of the interfacing I have on here on, and then I took a second layer of the same interfacing and fused it on just to see what it would do. And I think it's giving it enough stability that it'll do what I want, because you need to remember whatever interfacing you use for this part, it's not just that, it's that plus the one underneath it. So I didn't want to go too heavy so that it would look awkward and have maybe a line or something on the outside. So I think this will work well. You know, I see that it's giving the structure I want, but still very flexible. So I'm going to be cutting this piece that I made out of the same interfacing, my very, very lightweight interfacing, and I will be right back. Alrighty, so over here at my ironing board, I'm going to take one of my pieces, make sure the fusible point is down, you know, and I want to lay it so I have my 3/4 inch seam allowance here, and then I have a tiny space between my stay tape, which is a 1/4 inch wide, and this pad. And now I'm just going to press it on like normal. Try not to steam up my camera. It's always tricky finding camera placement near an ironing board. Okay, so at this point I'm going to sew this dart, and so between all of my manipulations it might have gotten a little bit off center down here, but I'm just going to do my best. So at about 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to stick a pin down. At about 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to bring my pin up, you know, at the line there. And push that through. Bring it up to where the top of my little triangle is here. Put a pin at the top there. Okay, anchor this one in here. And put one in the middle. And now I'm going to go ahead and sew this using the edge of my interfacing as my stitching line, starting at the bottom all the way to the top. Alright, so I have it sewed. I don't even think you can see the stitches, so that's kind of pointless to show you that. But what I need to do is trim this now. So I'm going to line up my ruler 5/8 inch from the edge of my, see if you can see that, from the edge of my interfacing. Draw a little line here, and I'm going to cut that part off. You don't need that here. Okay. Now I need to press this dart open. So it helps to have something roughly the same shape as what you're pressing. I'm going to grab my old ham here and see if I can find something that's about that size. Looks like the side of it is going to be somewhat that shape. So I'm going to start down here at the bottom and press it open about halfway. Okay. Now up here at the very top, I'm going to get my chopstick. You can get anything that's, you know, heat resistant and small. Put that in there, and I'm laying it on that seam. Put my, put my iron on top and pull my chopstick out. And just give it a little touch so that can start flattening this out where it wants to be. Okay, now let me finish it off by giving it a nice press. And I'm going to flip it upside down, or actually I should say right side up here. Excessive steam there. Making sure my seam allowances are still open, and give it a good press over here. And again, I'm pressing straight on it because my little plate on my iron is going to make sure, at least in this case, that I don't have any shininess up here. Okay? Now, again, I'm going to leave it on my pressing ham until it's completely cool and dry. All right? So you do one, do something else, then do the other one. Okay? Just going to leave her right here, and that way these fibers can learn this form. You know, I still have this guy hanging out. They do their part. Okay, so one last thing I need to do to these fronts before we can put them away for a bit and start working on the back is I need to steam this roll line. So what I'm doing is getting a damp towel. You know, that's just rust stain. It's not going to hurt anything. And you fold it up till it's about 1/2 inch thick. And I need to place it along that roll line right here and here. Okay, because you don't want to press a crease. You want to get a lot of moisture and steam in there. Move it down just a hair longer. I have it draped over the edge of my ironing board because that way I'm not disturbing the dart that we just sewed. So actually it might be easier if I fold this up, get an idea, put my towel down here. Okay, that looks pretty good right there. So now I'm just going to iron it, and that steam in the towel should start to work through the wool. I'm not pressing my steam button, I'm just using the moisture in the towel at this point. Okay, I want to have the towel thick enough that as I'm doing this, I don't get a crease in that roll line. I'm just getting the fibers used to curving there. Okay, so once I have this enough that I feel like it is plenty hot and plenty moist, you know what, I might flip it over a hair here. Yeah, that's okay. Like this, give me a couple more minutes. So I think this is good. What I'm going to do is slide my towel out and just leave it like that. I'm going to leave it probably, well, I have to leave it until it's completely dry and completely cold. So I'm just going to gently lift it up and move it out of the way so I can bring my other piece over here. So I just set that on a table where it can stay perfectly still, nothing will disturb it. Bring my other piece over, do the same thing, set it aside, and then we can start working on the back pieces. Okay, so we have actually it goes this way, a center back and a side back piece that gets sewed together like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the side back one away, get my center back piece. Again, I'm not worrying about my markings right now because I'm going to keep my tissue paper handy so I can just bring it back and figure those out when I need them, because I'm going to be doing some extra stuff to the back too. So first thing I need to do is sew up my center back seam. That's just going to be a standard 5/8 inch seam, and I'm going to be pressing that seam allowance open. All right, so my center backs are sewed together here, and I need to sew my side backs to them. So I have marked on my center backs here the point, and I just did it with pink chalk where my notches are. Just don't feel like clipping into this for right now. And so over here, I am also going to mark where that notch is because I need to put these two together. And sew those. And in case you are curious where you can get more information on this, I just grabbed my book off the shelf to make sure I didn't forget anything. This is an old Singer tailoring book. Love this book. It's so much fun, but they have information on tailoring via the interfacing method. Okay, and so if you're curious about the hows and whys that I make these choices and everything, you can probably find that information in here. So, they go through step by step and everything. Highly recommend it if you want it. You can find them on eBay and things like that. So anyhow, back to this. I'm going to mark my notches here and match them up. So these seams also at 5/8 inch. I'm going to be working a little bit of curve in, but nothing dramatic. And press those seam allowances open. So I'm going to press this seam open. I thought I would show you what I'm doing over here. This is my sleeve roll that I made, in that old video. And as you know, half of it is cotton, half of it is wool. In general, it's a good idea to press wool on wool. I'm not fanatical about it, but wool seems to like being pressed by wool. So I'm using the seam roll because, I don't know if you can tell, it's kind of molded itself into a square, which is kind of handy because that means this is more like a corner. All right, so what I do is I put my seam on that corner of the wool side of my seam roll, and that way I can open it up and press it, and I'm not going to have a lot of pressure to, the steam on the camera again. I'm not going to have a lot of pressure on the outside edges. So if I have a delicate wool or something, I'm not going to get the impression of this onto my main fabric on the outside. It works out better that way. It doesn't have to be a hardcore angle, you know, just a curve is nice. If you do feel like you need a hardcore angle, what I do is I got my wooden spoon here handy, and if I need that, sometimes I put that. The spoon keeps it from rolling away up here, but I can put that right underneath the seam, and then I can press that, and then for sure there's not going to be any impression from the outside edge. So anyhow, enough about pressing. Let me finish up the top part here. Okay, so for my next step here, I'm going to be working on a backstay. What a backstay is a piece that goes roughly here, and it's made out of a separate piece of fabric, and I am using this, which is like a polyester cotton blend, lightweight broadcloth kind of fabric. It's not going to stretch. I don't want it to stretch. I want it to be nice and sturdy, but fairly thin. Okay, so that's what I am going to be using. And it's a separate piece of fabric that gets sewed on. It stays separate from the wool because we want it to take the brunt of all of the stretching and everything for when you're moving your arms around and everything. That should keep, as much as humanly possible and everything, the nice wool fabric that I have from stretching out of shape and pulling seams. That should take the brunt of it. So, since our back is in two different pieces, I wanted to get the wool sewed first because I need to draw a pattern piece on here as a single unit. My first thing I'm going to do is to try to combine these two pieces into one, okay? So if I'm starting down here where my notches are, if I line up my notches but spread them out so they are 1.25 inches apart, that is what I want, because that 1.25 inches is 5/8 plus 5/8, so that's how far they should be spread apart on my final fabric. So I'm just going to kind of rotate down here just a little bit, make sure this is also 1.25 inches overlap. If I could pick up a pin, that would be nice. And up here there's a little curve, so you know we're just going to do the best we can, but overlap these lines up here by 1.25 inches also. Let's see, and that looks about right there. I'm just pinning them together instead of taping them because I may want to pull it apart at some point. Okay, so you can see there's a curve built in here, which is nice. That's for your shoulder and everything. I'm not going to build that curve into my stay. My stay is going to be flat. So my stay is going to be slightly smaller than my wool piece, but that's okay. That should do its part to help. If it busts past the stay, well then the wool is vulnerable. But if the stay is smaller and it contains it, then the strain shouldn't get to the wool. If that makes any sense. Let me just put one more pin right here. Right there. Okay, so now I'm going to start to draw it, and the stay I want to start about 3 inches below my underarm here. So if I 1, 2, 3, right about here, okay? And in general, they're going to cut through and then angle up just a bit so that when I'm at my top point, I'm still about 1 inch below where my armhole is. You know, just do your best. It's not an exact science. So if this is where I want it to end, I'm just going to kind of draw it this way. If I had a big enough lead in my pencil, you could see. And swoop it down here. Let me put my little paper behind here and draw it with my Sharpie so you can see that better. So I'm just drawing it across here, down, and over. Okay? Now I need to cut this out. I need to cut it out on the fold. Okay, so I need to make a separate piece because I need to cut this out on the fold, and this has a seam allowance built into it. All right, got my new tracing paper, but before I do that, I need to draw the seam allowance. And it's hard to see on here, but I'm just going to draw the 5/8 inch in up there and down here and bring it straight down. Okay, so now this is the point that I'm going to be putting on the fold on my new pattern piece. So let me get this out of the way. Put my piece of tracing paper on top. I'm going to stick a weight on top here. I'm going to cut some of this extra paper out of the way. Just don't need it right now. Love tracing paper, can you tell? Okay, so now I can see through everything. I am just going to go ahead. You know, I'm going to use a pencil so it doesn't bleed through. And draw my new pattern piece. Again, this is going to be on a fold. Okay, tracing this line that I can see, oops, down here. Tracing along the very edge of the pattern piece the rest of the way. Okay, so now I have my piece. I'm going to go ahead and cut this out and cut out fabric, one of these on fold out of this fabric. Just open this fabric and look what it is. I forgot that I had an extra piece of this from when I made that heritage lace nightgown a while back. So I'm still going to use it. I'm going to use the bottom piece, but I forgot I had that. You never know. It was just folded up and stuck in my stash. Anyhow, just thought I would show that to you. Just thought I'd show you what's outside my window. I think we're having some kind of a meeting here. We recently rotated a new bull in because, you know, you can't have daddies and daughters and granddaughters all together. And I think they're having a discussion. So just thought I would show you the view outside my sewing room window. All right, so here's my piece, and I'm just going to pull off all my pins, and I need to deal with the bottom edge. This is going to be hidden. It's all going to be hidden inside the lining. But to keep it from fraying, here they are, I need to pink this bottom edge of this. They're still talking out there. So I'm just going to come back and just pink along the edge like this, all the way across the bottom. Okay, what I need to do is put this piece on here, and I need to sew it around the neckline, which is going to do two things. It'll hold it on and it'll work as stay stitching, so this doesn't get stretched out of shape. Okay, and I need to sew this seam. So let me go ahead and get those pinned together and get that stitched. I'm going to be sewing this at a 1/2 inch seam allowance instead of 5/8 because I don't want it to be visible. I will be using a matching black thread, so if it is, it's not the end of the world, but you know, why go there? Okay, so here's my back, and if you can see, I'm pulling it and pulling it, and my back fabric is not getting tight, okay? That's because this, like I said, I cut flat, whereas my back wool is on a curve. So the thought is this is going to take all the stress, so these seams will be protected, okay? So I'm going to call this part good. And yes, I forgot to mention, when you come down here, you just continue down, still at 1/2 inch seam allowance. I didn't mention that before. So let me set this aside for just a minute. All right, so I've got my little tool here, and this package comes with all these directions. So if you buy one, make sure you have the package with it, because that is important. So it tells you very specifically sizing. And like I said, I just kind of winged it one time, and I saw that it was kind of nifty. So this will be my first time actually following directions completely. So what it says is, first I need to have a lightweight interfacing on my fabric, and this is the one I have been using, so you know it's good to test on what you're using. For the bound buttonhole parts, it says to cut them on the straight, unless it's an extremely firm fabric. Don't cut it on the bias, okay? And to fuse a lightweight interfacing on it if it's at all limp. So I did, okay? And it says, for the buttonholes, I'm going to be doing 2 buttonholes, one here and one here, hopefully. It wants you to draw a line through your buttonhole 5.5 inches long, all right? And then a line this way at the beginning of your buttonhole. And then I am going to be using these little brass fox buttons, and they are 1 inch. So it said to use the button length to get your buttonhole measurement. So I'm doing a 1 inch buttonhole and then drawing another line up and down here. That's what I've got so far. These little squares are 2.5 inches square, and I think we are ready to get started. Just realized I need to be doing this from the right side, so I am just very quickly going to hand baste over these lines so I can see these markings on the right side, and then we will continue. All right, I'm over here at my machine, so I wanted to show you. I ended up putting a piece of tape on both sides because I did one buttonhole already and I couldn't see. If I only had tape on one side, I couldn't see it when I flapped it, and you'll see what I mean. So let me show you. This is the completed buttonhole. It's perfect, and my button slides through it really well, so I'm really pleased with that. I can just pull out these basting threads in a minute. I'm going to be putting a button right here. So I think I paid about $10 for this. They have a whole bunch of vintage ones on eBay. I don't know if they still make them new or not, but I'm intrigued. So what I need to do is get my little fabric, and I'm going to want the ends of it to come through the front, okay? So I'm wrapping it around, so it's basically the right sides on the outside here, wrapping it around those prongs and sticking it from the front to the back, from the back, sorry, to the front with these sticking out. Now I need to take my little prongs and catch them in their little safety pin type of holders there, and then give a little tug from the right side just to make sure everything is secure and pretty straight. Okay, so it looks like that on the wrong side, this on the right side. So there's a little point here and a little indent point there. That gets lined up with this line. This is where the buttonhole is going to be, okay? This arrow here gets lined up with this line, and the top of this tape should line up with this line. All right, so I'm just going to try to set it on there so all of those things are lined up, and that looks pretty good to me. So just to hold it in place so it doesn't want to move while I'm working with it, I'm going to get a little piece of masking tape, just kind of tape it down for a minute here. I just keep reusing the same masking tape because, you know, why not? To set my foot so the needle goes in right here. So right on the inside of this bar, right where this line is, which is at the point where that arrow is, okay? So I'm going to try to set my needle in right there. You won't be able to see that because the presser foot's going to be in the way, but we will do what we can. So before I put my presser foot down, I'm actually going to set my needle in to make sure I've got everything lined up. Once my needle's down, then I'll set my presser foot down. And I'm going to be stitching all the way up. Remember, I've got a little piece of tape here I can still see, but all the way up till that point where I have marked with the tape, and then I'm going to back stitch just to anchor it in. Actually, I'm going to do a back stitch up here too, just to get the beginning of it anchored. Okay, it's kind of tricky if you have a long foot. I should have a different foot. See how my foot is very long back here, so it doesn't want to back up to where that hinge is. I think if I was using a shorter backed foot, it would be easier. See how this one isn't as long in the back? I think I'm going to switch that out really quick. Hold on a second. this foot fits a lot better because there's not so much in the back. So now I'm flapping both of these edges that way, and I am just going to sew straight down alongside that bar to the point where I can see the beginning of my tape and this line. And then back it up. Oops, making sure I do not sew into my metal bar here. For some reason it wants to go sideways. Okay, so I'm going to pull this out here, cut the threads. So you can see on the back I have a row of stitching from here to here. If I clip this thread, it will be a little more obvious. Okay, so now I need to do the second row of stitching. So I'm going to put it back under here, push both flaps of this fabric on the opposite direction, because we're going to sew the other side. And again, there is a mark to show you exactly where to start your needle down. And I think my problem is that this masking tape is sticking on the machine down here, so I'm going to hold it up. So I'm going to go forward a couple stitches, back it up, and now go all the way down to where my tape mark is, and back it up. Now I can go ahead and clip these threads here. So let me just go ahead and clip this other thread. I got threads everywhere, it looks like. You can tell this wool is fraying. So I need to, it's a good thing I had the interfacing fused to it, because otherwise I think this would be a mess right now. So I'm just going to pull this tape off. Let me raise you up. Okay, once I have the tape pulled off, I can unhook these little wires from their safety pin thing, open it up, and remove my little tool. And then these two will open up like little lips. And I am going to cut through just this fabric, not this fabric, straight up the middle. So I cut that all the way across. Okay, now on the inside, all right, so I'm going to want to cut this side in the middle, but before I get to the end, I'm going to need to make a little divot, a little angle right here. That's going to be important. So I'm going to start in the very middle and only get to within 1/4 inch of the end of my stitching right there. Okay, then come in here at an angle, and I'm just cutting my main fabric right now. Cut to this side there, and then up to that side there. So I have this little triangle-y lip thing, okay? Then again on this side, come up to within 1/8 or 1/4 inch of the end, clip to that side, and clip to this side, okay? So again, I have a little triangle-y lip. So now I can just flip the whole thing inside and set it nicely. So on the inside, everything should lay nice and flat here. Okay. On the outside, it looks nice. You want to make sure that little triangle piece is tucked in. All right, so I'm making sure it's tucked in that side and tucked in this side. So now to anchor it in, okay, so I'm trying to get it so that that little triangle that I cut is kind of sticking out right here, okay? And I'm going to, hold on, this is the one I just did, okay. So I need to pull out that triangle, which is right there. It's kind of hard to see, but it's a little piece of fabric right there. And I'm gonna get my threads all ready here. They want to curl in. I'm going to pull back my fashion fabric, so just this little triangle on top and the little square I sewed underneath is there. And I'm just going to sew straight across and back over. So that's basically anchoring that little triangle where it needs to stay. Okay, let me do the other side here too. So here is my button. I'm going to turn it around, open up this side now. The little, here I am, this is up here. You can see there's my little triangle piece there. Get these little lips laid nice and flat. Make sure that triangle is extended as much as it can be without pulling it apart. Set this up. So I'm just sewing through this. I'm sewing along the side of my main fabric, but not over it. Okay. And back it up. Okay. So that's going to anchor that little triangle in place. Right, so now if I flip this right, that's what it looks like. It's a beautiful little bound buttonhole. I just need to press it, pull my basting threads out. When I put the facing or the lining on the inside, I will be covering up all of this stuff out here, but for right now I can just leave that. And if I take my button, it's just going to slide through there. So there are other ways to make bound buttonholes, and if you don't have a little tool like this, I do have a video in a playlist called Making a Cardigan Jacket, and there's a separate video in there on the conventional way of making a bound buttonhole without a tool, okay? Very doable. This just goes a lot faster and it's a lot more uniform, so I'm sold. I'm going to go ahead and just press this so you can see if there's a difference. All right, so I really quickly just press them just to like make everything nice and flat. And there they are. So this is the way that I am going to be making my buttonholes on the front of my jacket. And there's a couple of them that go on the peplum. I've never done buttons on a peplum before, so this will be new. So yeah, I like it. I like the little tool. Hope you do too. And we will carry on now. Okay, so I did all that because this is cool and dry now, so I'm going to go ahead and proceed with it. And before I attach it to the back, I'm going to be making these buttonholes. In the directions, they wait until much later. For me, it's easier to do it now before I sew the facing on here. Okay, and so you can tell the buttonholes are on this side. I always have to double check because I forget. And I'm going to be marking it just like I did on my sample, where I mark it with a pen on the wrong side and then transfer that with basting to the right side, just because it's a lot easier to see these markings on the inner facing than on black wool. So let me put this aside really quick. What I need to do is, my poor little pattern, this thing has been so abused. I'm going to mark the very beginning and the very end of these buttonholes. There's only 2 of them here, and then there's going to be 2 of them on the peplum. Okay, so then if I take my pattern that has holes punched out at the beginning and end of those, and I'm trying not to mishandle my little dart, my little press of dart there. I actually should have done this before I sewed the dart in, so make a note if you're going to do this, put your buttonhole in before you sew in your dart. Okay, so I'm going to mark the little circles at the beginning and end of my buttonhole. All right, find where I put my ruler right here, and I'm going to draw a line straight through there all the way so I can see this line this way. Then, let's see here, these buttonholes, they want them to start, we're going to say 1.25 inches from the edge. Let me see if their button is the same size as mine. Mine looks just slightly larger. Okay, so I'm going to draw this line, which is my beginning of buttonhole line. I'm moving it in an inch because that's what I needed for my buttonhole, and drawing another line, making them way too long so I can see it on the outside of my little tool. And then coming back here and drawing a line straight through these two little buttonhole marks, making sure everything is nice and straight. Okay, so this here and this here is going to be my buttonhole. So I'm going to go ahead and, just like last time, with my basting thread, needle, thread baste these lines so I can see it clearly on the right side. All right, so you can see the thread markings here. I'm going to go ahead, fuse some interfacing to a scrap, cut my two 2.5 inch squares, make these buttonholes exactly like you just saw, and I will be right back. Good morning, new day. Damp, rainy, cold day outside. Just got back in from my barn chores. And I wanted to show you what I did over here because I've been moving things around and sometimes people are interested. So I used to have my water tank hanging up there. I have a big screw into the framework around my window, and I had it hanging up there, but I found I was very limited in my movement, and because it's like umbilically cord attached to my iron, I wanted more movement, so I got a couple of these IV poles, the telescoping IV poles online, you know, I think from Walmart.com, but they have them everywhere. I thought I was ordering one, but apparently I ordered two, so now I have an extra one here. And I think that that's going to help me being able to move. And also, as you saw earlier, I moved my little, this is my stand that I clamp my camera onto. I moved it onto my window frame. So I'm thinking that this might be able to give us better at the ironing board views and give me more movement and everything, but I just thought I'd show that to you. So now over here to the other side of the room, I have her just kind of loosely pinned up here, you know, nothing sewed together. The first thing I'm going to be doing today is sewing these shoulder seams together really well, you know, permanently. And then I'm going to baste stitch, you know, with the machine, with a long stitch, my side seams. And then I can try this piece on as it is and make any adjustments just on this side seam that I need to. And just from holding it up on here, remember I added all that thinking that I was going to be adding about 3 inches of ease, you know, because it is a jacket, presumably to be worn over some kind of a garment, you know, probably a smaller one or a silky one or something, but still I wanted ease of movement. So I think it's going to work out really well, but I want to try it before I go to any future steps. So I can tell you that the front piece and the back piece match up exactly. A lot of times on jackets, on the back piece, it'll be slightly wider, so you work in some ease, so there's more movement area. Not so with this one, it's just a straight, matching up exactly seam. I'm just going to sew it normal, 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then press this open. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Okay, so let me tell you what I learned. First of all, when I tried it on, I had plenty of room to move this way, but there were a couple fitting issues in addition to circumference that I saw, and one was that it seemed to hang like a bag, and I looked, the pattern does not call for shoulder pads, but just to try it out, this side has a 1/2 inch ladies shoulder pad in it and this side does not, and I can tell when I was trying it on, I slipped the shoulder pads under it and it squared everything out. If you look at the picture, it's showing very, very squared shoulders, okay? I was not getting that with my wool. It was very drapey. It lacked oomph. So I'm just trying it on with just foam shoulder pads, you know, they're good for trying things on with, but it's 1/2 inch thick, so I think that's what I'm gonna go with. I will be putting a 1/2 inch thick shoulder pad in. The other thing is this pattern, Looks a little hard to tell, but it is, the bodice part is slightly higher in the front and is at regular waist level in the back. Okay, so it's a little bit higher and then waist level. Because my waist placement is not standard, it really stuck out here and I hadn't taken that into consideration. So I've just folded up the bottom now where I feel like it would be an appropriate place for that waist seam, and I'm going to mark that. But that is going to mean cutting off about a little over an inch on that bottom. So I'm just going to mark where I have it folded, make sure it's level on both sides, mark that, and then I'll come back and I will add a 5/8 inch seam allowance below that mark and then just trim all of that off. And between both of those, I think it's going to work out. So happy with that, but let me make those adjustments. All right, so back here at the table, I wanted to show you what I just did is I permanently sewed these side seams, pressed these seam allowances open, and while I was over there, I went ahead and serged around, not the bottom because I may be cutting that, but all the way around here, my neckline, my armholes, just because the fraying was really starting to get out of hand and I needed to rein that in a bit. So here's my thread basting mark that I just kind of did as I was standing there next to my dress form, you know, running a needle and thread around the bottom to get an idea. And before I start cutting, I want to look at it and make sure that what I folded is symmetrical. So if I can get this to get out of the way there, I'm actually starting to taper it towards the front, coming around here like this. This is where my new fold line is going to be. So I wanted to talk to you about, it's kind of an apology, but kind of an explanation. When I was modifying this pattern, I knew it needed to be modified, but I knew that this project was going to be so involved with so many steps that I didn't want it to become a pattern modification video. I wanted it to be more of a fusible interfacing construction video. So because of that, I kind of skimped on a classic full bust adjustment with a darted bodice, okay, which is obvious to everybody who usually does full bust adjustments, and you know, mea culpa, that is me. But I want to explain what my saving grace is in all of this, because you see, because of my proportions, raising the waist is a good thing, okay? Now, usually with a full bust adjustment, you have the side over here that is bigger, but you also have this because, you know, boobs are 3D, they're not 2D. They don't just go this way, they go that way, okay? So, because I added space over here and I did not take into consideration adding space down here, which you normally would do in a standard full bust adjustment, I did a shortcut and everything, but because I have to shorten the waist here, that kind of evens out. So what I lost in, what I'm losing in having to raise my waist in the front, I'm gaining in because I skimped on my full bust adjustment, which you usually add, whatever you add on the side, you add in the front too, or else you end up with a garment that's too short in the front, you know? So it all worked out. I will try not to skimp next time, but I think it's gonna all work out here. So with all of that set aside, what I need to do is, starting in my center back here, I'm going to first measure where this is, and this line is about 1 7/8, okay? So let me get my chalk. I'm using my little roller chalk on here because it will show up. If this is my stitching line, 5/8 below that would be here, okay? And then I'm going to go to the next one. Now the next one, I want to make sure they're the same on both sides. So here, this is 1.5 inches. Here, this is 1.5 inches. I got them the same. That's good. So if that's my stitching line, 5/8 below that is going to be right here, okay? And I can put this here. So my new cutting line, I'm just going to connect these two, okay? And so on and so forth. So then, you know, I'm gonna do the same thing. Measure here and here. Make sure they're the same distance. If not, I'll average it out, come up with a distance, add 5/8. By the time I get here, I'm actually where I need to be. So there's gonna come a point where it's just gonna blend, and I'm good with that, okay? So let me go ahead and finish marking this, and I will show you what I'm trimming off. All right, so this is the strip I have cut off. What I'm going to do right now is pull out my basting stitches, but I'm going to run a row of stay stitching at a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way across here, just to anchor it, because I'm basically cutting off all my back stitching and my darts and in my side seams and everything. So I want that to hold it together. Once I have that 1/4 inch stay stitch all the way across, I'm going to come back and just serge right along the edge of the bottom just to prevent it from fraying anymore. All right, so this is completed stay stitched, serged at the bottom. Before I do anything else, I need to make this modification to my pattern piece so that when I cut out my lining, it's going to match. So knowing this is my center back, I'm going to line that up with my center back, draw a little line there, draw a little line here, which is going to tell me where I need to cut straight across on this pattern piece. And then this is the one that goes with it. I know that this is the seam that's got sewn there, so if I put this here, I can just draw a line here. At this point, it's getting about a 1/4 inch from the bottom, draw a line there, and cut those from this lower one up to this upper one up here. And then the last thing is our poor little front piece that has been so abused. I need to just taper off this little bit that was at the side. So right there. So now this is good for cutting out the lining. I'm still not going to cut out the lining until I get my sleeves on there, because you never know what the sleeves are going to do. Okay, so now we finally get to deal with this little undercollar that I made so long ago. And so before I put it on, there's a couple things I need to do. I need to make sure that I transfer the markings over here. There's a little dot. Come on, unroll for me. There's a little dot up here, right about where this roll line that I drew hits. There's a notch. I obviously know where my shoulders are. What I need to do is run a row of stay stitching from this dot all the way across to this dot. I'm going to do it just under 5/8 of an inch. And I need to also transfer markings to my undercollar. So there's the dot that corresponds with here. There's a notch that corresponds with this. And there's a little triangle which is going to correspond with the shoulder seam. But I stay stitching in order to be able to sew this in nice and flat. This has to be able to open, which means I need to make some clips in here so that that can flex very well. So it looks like what they are offering is that you make your clips between the notches. So starting here at this notch, I'm going to make a clip up to about a 1/16 of an inch of my stay stitching. I don't want to go any closer than that. And just every inch or so, adding another clip. Usually right around here. You want a couple, so I will just do every inch or so, and if I need to come back and add more, I will. Okay, so with all of those in, now I can open this up nice and flat, which is good, and get my little collar piece here and just start matching it up. So matching center back to center back is easy because they both have a seam. So let me pop this on here. Okay, And matching this mark here, remember there was a triangle, that's what this is, that went with my shoulder seam. So I'm going to put that up here. Okay, and I'm going to do that same thing on this side. Putting a pin through my shoulder seam mark and matching that up where it should go on the shoulder seam. Okay, and then there's the notch. And I have a little mark there where my notch is because I clipped so much. I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was dealing with. So I'm going to put a pin here at my notch. And finally, where my final dot is, I'm going to stick a pin through there, and on this side have it come out where the dot is on this side here. See it there? Line up the top edges and tuck it in. So with those anchor points done, I should be able to just come back and work everything else between together. So I think my little clips were plenty. Okay, and it's matching up really well. So let me go ahead and pin the other side and we will stitch this. So because this project is what it is, I'm going to hand base the undercollar on before I actually go over to the sewing machine, because you can't be too safe with matters like this. I'm just going to be basting it from circle to circle. I'm not out here in the seam allowance because when I stitch it, I just start my stitching at the circle and come in. So as you see, I am basting it right along in general where 5/8 of an inch is, and then this thread is large and loose enough that I can just pull it out after I stitch it. Even if I sew over it, I should be able to pull it through. So let me just go ahead and finish this. Once I have it hand basted from circle to circle, then I'll go over to the sewing machine and machine stitch it. All right, so I've got that stitched. I'm just coming back here and trying to pull out my basting stitches. It's not completely necessary if they're here hidden in the seam allowance, but it just makes me feel better. Okay, so if I look, oh, and I want to show you the way I was guiding it, you know, dot here, but then I was trying to be conscientious and sew it just, you know, barely underneath this fusible piece all the way along so that my stitches aren't catching this piece and that's going to be free to come up easily. Okay, so if I open this up, that looks pretty good, pretty good. What I'm going to do is come in here between the notches. I would say from about this point over, and with my pinking shears, just taking off the top, I want about a 3/8 inch seam allowance in here. But I want to pink it because I think that will help it blend and lay nicer. So I'm going to do that all the way around the neckline. Okay, now that I have that pinked, I'm going to go over and on top of my little sleeve roll where I can kind of contour it a little bit, I'm going to carefully press this seam allowance open very well, but not messing up this one that we already did. So if I put it on my seam roll, I can kind of work that way. All right, so I have that part just sitting on my dress form, waiting for me to finish everything else, but at least putting it on my dress form, I can keep that collar bent the way I want and everything like that. So now let me tip you back down here. And we're going to get started on dealing with this sleeve. So actually what I'm going to do before I do anything is serge around both of these pieces. Just because of the way it unravels, I just want to secure it because the next thing I'll do after that is putting in my gathering stitches to form the sleeve cap. And I just don't want anything to fray. The sides of my pieces are different enough. I'll be able to pretty clearly tell which side is which side, so I'll be able to go back and put my markings on after that. Okay, so at this point I have my sleeve pieces serged, as you can see, and I need to transfer some markings. Right now I'm worried about these 3 dots here. And so what I'm going to do is just eyeball it, put these little roller chalk marks at the beginning and end. And what I need to do is run 2 rows of gathering stitches up here. I'm going to do one at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, one at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leave nice long tails on there. And I'm going to do this for both sleeves. And just because I don't want to lose track of my top seam, I'm not notching this right now. I'm just leaving it complete. But I want to be able to match that to my shoulder. So I'm just putting a tape there because that'll be easy for me to see. Okay, so I ran my 2 rows of gathering stitches. Hopefully you can see them. I know it's black on black there. While I was over there, I went ahead and stitched up this side seam. It just matches up exactly. It doesn't have any ease at an elbow or anything like that. It's just a straight stitch. So I held it up to my arm, and I think that the hem designation that comes with the pattern will work for my arm. So I'm going to go with that. And what they want you to do is, before you deal with the sleeve cap or anything like that, they want you to hem this. So they're calling for a 1 5/8 hem, 5/8 inch hem. So I'm going to fold it up to 1 5/8. You know, I'll measure it before I do press it. And then I'm going to hand stitch this on. All right, so let me show you how I'm going to sew this. I have it pressed up at 1 5/8 inches. And I have it serged, as you can see here, hopefully. So what I'm going to do is, with it up like that, I turn down the serging part like this. So I have a fold exposed here. And I'm going to do catch stitching. Just start it up here just for funsies. And I'm just catching a thread or 2 up here and then coming down into my fold and catch some more. So my needle is aiming this way, but I'm working in this direction, if that makes sense. So then I just kind of move on and do some more, where I just pick up a thread or 2 over here, go that way, come back over here in my fold area and do this. Now I'm just going through 1 layer of fabric so that when I'm done, this can flip up. And when I press it, it'll just lay nice and flat, and this stitching shouldn't be visible from either side. That's the idea. So I'm just going to do that all the way around. If when you get over here, it's too tight, you may need to undo a stitch or 2 up here just so that that can open a little bit more and lay flatter. At this point I can't tell if it is or not. There's a possibility because this is a fairly small jacket cuff here. So I am getting the impression, where's my pattern? Here it is, that this is to be worn actually more like a blouse than a jacket, according to their design. I mean, you can tell that she's got ease in there. You got a little fold and everything going on there. So it has ease, but the way that the sleeve is designed, it doesn't have extra room for elbow movement. The way that the cuff is very narrow, that's, you know, usually not indicative of a jacket type garment, more of a blouse type garment. You know, this could be a great jacket for a beautiful home deck fabric, a beautiful, you know, multicolored whatever. And if you did it that way, the shoulders might hold their square and everything enough that you wouldn't need shoulder pads and things like that. So anyway, that's just my thought process. let me go ahead and finish hemming up these sleeves. It was a little tight, so I ended up having to open up, maybe 3/4 inch of stitching here just so I could open it so that all of these would lay flat, but that's okay. I'm just gonna kind of whip stitch that opening to the seam allowance so that it will lay nice and won't come apart, and that is it. That's what one of the sleeves looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and press this and do the other one. Okay, so trying out a new camera angle, always kind of fun. I need to figure out how to adjust it so that I can get the best picture of everything going on here, but that the camera is far enough away that the steam doesn't go up into it. So we'll try this. So I am going to shape the sleeve cap of my sleeves here. And I'm using my handy dandy press mitt and a couple bookends to hold it, okay? So what I want to do is, well, first of all, turn my sleeve right side out here. I've got my hem all made, invisibly stitched, so that's nice. So I have my piece of tape here marking my center. I'm actually going to pull most of that off. There'll be a little fragment of tape, and that is enough for me, just so I can keep an eye on that. And let me get a couple of these threads on one side and give them a gentle tug just to work some fullness in. Okay, not a whole lot, just a little bit. And I'm not really being super picky about how much I'm pulling in because I'm going to be adjusting that in just a moment. Looks like one of my threads is a little short here. Hang on. Okay, so now I'm going to pull some on this other side here and work that up. All right, so I've got enough gathers in here that I can get started. So I am going to set this over the top of my pressing mitt, trying to keep my shoulder seam mark at the top. And first of all, just pulling things so it looks like it's at the 5/8 inch seam allowance area, that it's pretty straight, all right? And I can go ahead and just, with my finger, move the ease stitches around so it's all even. Now, once I have it so I'm fairly happy with that, I'm gonna get my iron, do a lot of steam, clamp it with my hand, basically letting the steam stretch and shrink and shape all of these threads. So let me move it over here so that it wants to be in this shape up here at the top. A slightly different angle here. So again, I'm just pressing, steam, press, steam, and then pull it in with my hands, okay? Ideally, I would want to leave it on here until it was completely dry and completely cool, but I have another sleeve to do. So I am going to be pulling it off. But when I lift it, it should want to hold that shape. So that's going to make it a lot easier to set into my jacket. Again, this fabric is very soft, so it's hard to demonstrate, but trust me, it's holding that sleeve cap shape. So I'm going to go ahead and shape the other one and then set these into my jacket. Okay, so I am going to match up my sleeves, and starting at the very bottom here, I'm going to match up the center bottom seam and then move up here to the very center top seam, marking my shoulder placement right there. And I think that the rest of this should go pretty well. I actually have already basted this in because that is my next step. I am going to hand baste my whole sleeve in. And by basting it by hand, I'm going to be able to work in any ease a whole lot easier that way. So I actually need to snug up these just a hair here. But you can see it's fitting very well. All right, so now that it is pinned all the way around, I'm going to start hand basting it together. I'm just going to start down here. Well, actually, This is the very top up here, but I want to start at the bottom. So let me flip my fabric. So I'm going to start right here and just hand baste it at about the same amount that my stitching line will be, which is 5/8 of an inch. So that's about where it's going to be. All right, so I've got it all basted on. I'm just going to gently open up my sleeve and make sure everything looks good on the outside, and it does, before I go over and stitch it at my sewing machine. So I'm going to do a row of stitching at 5/8 of an inch all the way around to start with. Morning. Next day, had a sleep on this. You know, I could tell it was not exceeding my expectations in the design. And I thought about it, and I came to the realization last night that I had been thinking of this project totally wrong. I had been thinking of this like the jacket is a blazer, like I said, by incorporating ease and all of that into it. That's not what this is, and this is my problem. This is supposed to be closer to like the silhouette of the classic Dior bar jacket, bar suit. I'll throw a picture up so you can see what I'm talking about, where the jacket is the blouse. If there's something under it, it's a camisole or a slip or, you know, a tiny tank or something like that. But the jacket is the blouse, and it is form-fitting on top, because otherwise it just didn't make sense. It was too baggy around the back, and then you had this waist that was, you know, somewhat fitted at the waist, and it was like, it wasn't working. It wasn't working. So this is what I did this morning. I came in, and I have not cut out my lining fabric yet, which is a good thing, but I unpicked that side seam and the bottom half of my sleeves, and then I imposed my side seams where they should have been on the original pattern, at this point and not this point, you know, and it works. And so I am kind of frustrated that I went through all of that to add that side piece and everything on the bodice, because that just is, this is what caused me all this grief, adding extra ease where there should not have been ease. And I got that idea because on the pattern envelope, it has what size bust the pattern size is designed for. So the pattern bust size was 38, and the pattern actual placement was 41.5. So I was thinking, oh, we need to incorporate ease in there. This design works so much better with very little ease around there. I mean, you don't want it skin tight. You want to be able to move, but you don't want any fullness at all. So I'm going to be fixing that first thing this morning, but let me switch the camera over so you can see that it looks a whole lot better now. Or at least I hope you can see it looks a lot better. So right here, I still have the top part of this sleeve cap in, okay, but when I lift it up, you can see the bottom is not attached. So I opened it up to just above where those notches are, because that's where the main curve is. So I can reattach that after. And I have this side seam now pinned where it should be according to the pattern. And I hope you can see, I get a much better silhouette this way. The back line's up better. Everything's better. She's a happier girl. So off camera, I'm going to go ahead, re-sew these side seams where they should be, you know, trim them appropriately and everything. The only thing that's going to be a little bit of it's not really a problem, it's just a thing, is because I added all of that extra width to just one side of my sleeve, my underarm seam line is going to be slightly off center. That doesn't really bother me. No one's going to be staring right here. You know what I mean? If I was to do this again, I would still need to add width to my sleeve piece. But instead of doing it this way, I would do it the way that I have shown many times before, by expanding it out on both sides of the bicep evenly. So now you know all of my pitfalls, downfalls, everything like that, but we can fix this. It's still early in the process, so I'm going to go ahead and make those changes on my side seam, and I'll show you how I'm going to fix this sleeve, because at this point, when I take this in down here, I have less room down here for the amount of sleeve I have. So I'm going to need to get more room down here to sew this sleeve, which is a couple inches wider. Okay, so I will show that to you in a bit, but first things first, I'm going to turn off the camera, redo my side seams, and I'll be right back. Okay, so here's my new side seam, you know, as it should be. And this is how I've set my sleeve. I'm showing you this side because you can see the basting stitches a little bit better than dark on dark probably. But basically from this point down, I just brought that entire sleeve armhole slightly lower. So it's going to sit maybe ½ an inch or so lower than this one would be. You know, it's going to be down here. My basting line is basically at the stitch line. But I think that's okay. That's not a big deal. So now I just need to re-stitch these bottom parts of my sleeve armholes on, make this trim, and I will be right back. All right, so I hope you can see this is my new stitching line here. So now what I'm going to do is come back inside on both sleeves, make a second row of stitching 1/4 inch in all the way around both of the armholes. All right, so the next instruction says to trim close to the second seam in, and I am pinking it probably, you know, close-ish, like a fat 1/8 of an inch away. This is my seam line there, you know, and I'm going to finish pinking all the way around both of the armholes here. Okay, so the instructions want you to get started with the lining. I'm going to pause that for a second because I'm going to put in my shoulder pads. These are the ones I'm using. They're just a basic waywalk.com women's shoulder pad. So what I have done is the shoulder pads, they're not symmetrical. One side is shorter than the other side. This side tapers longer. I'm going to be using the longer part for the front. I want it to come longer because it's going to kind of help to emphasize this extra piece of interfacing that we fused to the front. I want it to support that a little bit deeper. So I drew a line about midway in the main circle part up here. Okay, it's not exact science, but it's about midway. So this is the front, this is the front, this is the back, this is the back. So if I open up my jacket, and here's my shoulder seam, this is front, this is back. I want to get one where my front is here, my back is here, this edge here is what I'm lining up against the edge of my, I'm actually going to move it all the way out past the seam line, a little into that seam allowance, okay? And this line that I drew, I'm matching it up with the shoulder seam. So I'm just going to pin it. There's all kinds of ways to sew these in. This is a lightweight one. It's not a huge deal. What I'm going to be doing is just with a needle and thread stitching it to this seam allowance here. And then I'm going to come back and stitch it here to this seam allowance, down here to this seam allowance, and over here to this seam allowance, just making loose tacks. I'm going to make them loose enough that if this wants to shift a little bit, it's not going to snag on the jacket and show from the outside. So let me get a black needle and thread. Okay, so I am sewing with a doubled strand of thread. I just wanted to give you a quick look at how I do it so that it's a loose tack. So if I place my shoulder pad generally where I want, and you get something, I'm using the end of my handy dandy chopstick here. And I'm just going to sew basically over my chopstick. Whoops, just dropped it. Hang on a second. I mean, you can use anything you want. I could use this handle from my seam ripper. I could use a pen, whatever. Just something to give you a little bit of space, okay? So I have it down there. I'm going to pick everything back up again. Come back up this side. And again, as long as I'm in the seam allowance, I'm not really stressing too much. This chopstick, because it's metal, it doesn't want to stay very easily, but that's okay. So now you can see it's going around there. It's nice and loose. I'm only going to go around it twice and then tie it off on the back side. Like that. Then I can pull this out on the back side here. I'm having a hard time with my fingers today. Just do a couple little back stitches and a side one to lock it in. I always drop things when the camera is rolling. Okay, so 2 back stitches and a little side one to lock it in, and then this one is done. And just having that little bit extra in there is going to give it a little bit of movement. So if this pad, you know, it's just better that way. Let's just put it that way. It's just better this way, so it's not super tight. So I'm going to sew this one here, and then this shoulder pad will be done, and I'll do the other one, and then we will go ahead to the lining. So now that I have my pattern basically finalized, I'm going to go ahead and cut out all the lining pieces that I need to. The peplum part of this skirt is not lined, so that just has a single layer of their fashion fabric, no lining there. It's really just the bodice and the sleeves that have lining. At this point, I'm going to get started on the lining pieces. Now, piece number 6, even though it is the front facing and it's attached to the lining, it's out of the fashion fabric. The rest of the pieces are lining. And for the front, I know that I lowered the bust on the outer fabric. The lining piece is cut more like a princess seam, and I'm not going to worry about it. I think at this point, I think it's going to be okay. So what I have to do first, though, and in the instructions, if you're not paying attention, it can catch you off guard, is they tell you to go ahead and stay stitch between these 2 notches, all right? But before you do that, you have to interface these pieces. And that is noted way back here in the beginning, where they have all of the what to interface guidelines. So this is one of them. So I'm going to, again, use my very lightweight, turn that very lightweight interfacing here, and fuse that to both of these pieces so that they are ready to go. What I need to do now is mark these. So I have fused my interfacing to the back, and I have a couple marks I need to indicate. There is a circle up here, which is going to help with my collar placement. This dot up here is going to match the shoulder seam. The rest of these are notches. Instead of clipping them, I'm just going to draw a little line where they are for right now. Just because this stuff frays so much, I don't want to cause any more issues. Now there's these 2 notches on this long side here, and I need to run a row of stay stitching between these 2. I'm going to run that, which is just a straight stitch, at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance right here, and I'm going to do that on both pieces. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to set these aside for a minute, get my side front piece, and I need to mark some things here too. So there's a circle up here, which at this point is not really necessary because that's has to do with sleeve placement. It is what it is at this point, but I'll mark it anyway. And then there's notches. And so I need to make sure I mark these 2 notches because those get matched up with this position over here when I'm matching these 2 together. And this one is probably going to get some clips so that it can make that shape to match up well. So for my lining, I am using my traditionally standard Bimberg rayon that I dearly love, and this is in kind of a caramel color. And so the way I'm going to do this is I clipped my notches on my lining piece here, so I can line up my notch where my stay stitching begins. All right, and I'm just going to pin from the bottom up to here, actually, because this wants to move so much. I'm going to put one in the middle. So this is where the notch and stay stitching start. Then I'm going to come all the way up here and start pinning at the top edge, matching up the notch. Hang on. Down here. So here's my notch. Here's where my stitching starts. I'm going to match that up right here. and then even out everything in between. You can see we've got a lot of curves to deal with, so I'm just kind of letting it sit upright. It seems to want to behave better if it can do a little three-dimensional stuff over there. Putting a few pins in just to hold him together. Okay, so now when I get to this curve part, I'm going to flip it over here because I'm going to need to make a few notches up to, but not passing, my stay stitching. Just going to make them, you know, every like inch and a half or so. And what that's going to do is where this is sticking out, my lining is sticking out, now I can flex this out to meet it. Okay? And that way I can form that same curve right here. And now I can pin this. Once I have it pinned, I'm going to go over to my sewing machine and sew this here with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so here are my front lining pieces. After I sewed them, I pressed it so all the seam allowances are going towards the side over here. So they're just, the heavier piece is just lying out flat. And I think that it's looking very lovely. So I'm going to set that aside and work on my back pieces. The first thing I'm going to do is there is a center seam up the center of my back that I need to put in at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so I have my center back seam sewed, seam allowances pressed open, and now I need to put my back sides on. And you know, there's one notch there, but it's just a simple 5/8 inch seam allowance. Press this seam open just like that on both sides. All right, so here's my back. Everything's pressed open. I've got my fronts, and now I'm going to sew the shoulders and the side seams of the front pieces to the back pieces. And once I have those sewed, I will be pressing these open also. And I'm going to do that for both fronts to both backs. All right, so here it is. Shoulder seams done, side seams done, everything pressed open. And now I'm going to be working on this upper collar. This is the upper collar that's going to be sewn onto the lining, that will then be paired up with the undercollar we did all that work on the main fabric. And I was going to tell you, this is shaping up to be an adorable little bolero cropped jacket. If you're looking for a pattern for a tailored cropped jacket or something, don't put the peplum on it, and this is really cute. So anyhow, it says not to put any interfacing on this, and I'm actually tempted to. Just, you know, my very, very light interfacing, just to give it a little bit more substance than it has. I'm tempted, I haven't fully decided yet. But what I need to do, hang on just one second. I just went over and felt the collar on my main fashion fabric one, and I think that it could handle it if this was interfaced. If that was really stiff, I wouldn't, but it's not. It's not. So I am going to use my light interfacing on this just to give it enough substance that it's not going to want to shift, because I don't know if you can see it, since it's this woven, the fibers can, you know, get skewed a little bit. So first thing, fuse some of my super light interfacing. Okay, so I've just transferred all of my markings here. This line is my center back line. Got my 2 dots here for shoulder placement. Where my notches are, I just drew a little caret over that, so to emphasize placement. And then there's the dot to match up to the collar on each side. So this side up here without anything on it, that's the outside. This side is obviously the part that gets matched up onto my fabric. Okay, so setting this here, right side, it's together, right side of my lining to right side of my collar. I'm going to start with my center back line, match that up the whole way down here. Okay, the next mark is this one, which should match up with that 0.5/8 inch in on my shoulder line, which is about here. Get that matched up. And my notch on here disappeared. I can grab that, but actually I'm just gonna skip that and go ahead to matching this dot with this dot. So if I stick a pin straight through this one and through this one, or thereabouts, that should line up, and what is in between, my notch should be right about in the middle, because if I remember right, everything fit really well, and it does. It'll look like this is sticking out, but at that 5/8 inch mark, it does match up. So not really worrying about it right there. Let me just get the rest of this pinned together and pin the other side. All right, so I just realized I skipped an important thing, which was stay stitching this neckline. I did not do that, and you should do that. I did not do that, but at this point I don't want to unpin anything. And the reason you would do it is so when you clip, you can be really secure and safe that your clips aren't going to go too far. So I am just going to try to be conscientious that my clips are only about 1/4 inch or so deep. And I'm doing them, a couple of them in this back section here and in this little front part. And the purpose of this is so when I go to sew, this will all flex out, so it'll be a lot easier to sew straight across here. At the 5/8 inch point, I'm still fine. It's just, I did not do that. I should have done that. I will do that in the future, but at this point, I don't want to repin this. So now what I need to do is go to my machine and sew it from this dot over here to this dot over here. I'm not going past it. I'm leaving this outside part open on each side at 5/8 of an inch. At this point, the instructions just say trim. You know, I guess they leave it up to your discretion. I will show you how I am going to interpret trim, which is using my pinking shears, come in here about halfway through this seam allowance and pink. And they don't say press, but I am going to press, and I'm going to press this open. So let me finish pinking this and I will show you that. Okay, so the way I interpreted the word trim was to trim it by pinking it. And then what I did not say it in the instructions, but it makes sense to me, is to come back and press this seam allowance open, you know, over a curve so that it's ready to match up with the other side. So I think that's it. I'm going to call it a day for right now, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good morning. Welcome to the next day. Really excited because once we get this lining in, it's just smooth sailing to buttonhole and peplum, attach peplum, and then we'll be done. So we'll see. Today might be the day. But I wanted to tell you a couple things. One is I have enough of this wool left over that I can do a skirt, so I can have an entire suit now that I can see that the jacket is coming along well. And so what I'm going to be doing is just this, just a plain, slightly flared, more like an A-line-ish kind of skirt. So this is what I'm going to be using. That will be up next. But while I was digging in my patterns, remember I told you that this reminded me of an old gunny sacks suit that I had in the early 90s, late 80s. I found that pattern. This is it. This is the one that I was telling you about, that this kind of reminds me of. And I dearly loved this. So it's vintage. They don't make them anymore. It's number 8947 if you're interested. You know, sometimes you can find them on eBay or something. The main difference is that this one, you know, it's got the 80s shoulders. In this, you can't really tell, but this is a very wide, almost leg of mutton kind of sleeve here with the big shoulder pads and stuff. But that was a fabulous suit. I dearly loved it. So this may be my modern, more not as over the top, not so much lace and Victorian-ish as my Jessica McClintock ones were. But that is where I stand today. So let me turn the camera down and we're just going to continue on. All right, so here is the lining and the collar that we attached and everything. And before I can set this aside and do the sleeves, what it wants me to do is press under the bottom edge of this 5/8 of an inch. Usually I do not do that ahead of time, but I'm feeling like I just might. But just to make sure that I get it exactly right, I am going to use my ruler, draw where that 5/8 inch line is, up here in the wool where my heat erasable pins will not show up. I'm going to just use my roller chalk pen, okay, so I can see that. So I'm going to mark that all the way over, go over to my ironing board and press the whole thing under to get a nice crease like that, and then we'll be ready to start on the sleeves. Okay, so now for the sleeves, I have the same sleeve piece cut out here that I did for my wool, but at the very bottom, there's a line here that they want you to cut your lining at, which is 1 inch above the bottom. So instead of cutting it there, I just drew a line 1 inch up from the bottom of my sleeve there, and I'm just gonna cut it straight across here to get that finished length for my lining. So now that that is done, what we're going to need to do is, just like we made the sleeve for the other one, do this where they want us to put E-stitches at the top between the 2 dots and sew up this side seam and press that side seam open. You've seen that before in the wool, so I'm just going to go ahead and do those 3 steps and bring my sleeve piece back here to set in. So back over here at my table, here's my sleeve, you know, got the gathering stitches up there, seam allowance pressed open, and I am setting these into my lining like I did for the main part, except that I am not basting it ahead of time. The basting really helps ensure that you're not going to get puckers and things like that. I don't really care about if there's a tiny pucker or something in the lining. No one's going to see that anyway. But just like on the outside, because my sleeve is longer than my pattern is for my armhole, I am starting it a little bit lower down here, about 1/2 inch lower, just to work that extra space in. So I'm going to pin them both in just like this, get them all set in, stitch it around at 5/8 of an inch, and then I'll probably come back and reinforce the bottom a little bit. So now that I have it sewn on, I'm just going to come back and trim around the edges with my pinking shears to make it nice and even, you know, leaving a fat 1/4 inch there, and then I can set it into my jacket. Okay, so at this point it is time to marry these two. So I've got my jacket just laying down here, and I'm going to be matching up these outside edges here with my lining. So the first thing I'm going to be matching up is my collar. So let me very carefully pin these together, just from here over to here. Now the upper collar is bigger than the undercollar, which it's supposed to be. The directions say stretch undercollar to fit. So just kind of giving it a gentle tug is all you need to do, and it kind of wants to round itself out just like that. Okay, now that I have that pinned together, I'm going to pin together my front sections, and down here I'm going to be sewing it with this folded up. Okay, so this is my lining. It's going to be actually up like this at the bottom. All right, so I believe there's a notch to match up right about here. Yeah, so let me go ahead and pin these together on both sides. This over here, the seam allowances that join the collar, and it looks like I have some loose threads I need to clip off here. Okay, these seam allowances here are going to get pushed up on both the back and the front. And starting right here where this stitching comes together, I want to make sure that that is matching up exactly on both sides. Okay, that's important. And I can see my pin line of stitching on that side also, so I'm good there. So my first line of stitching, you know, with all the seam allowances out of the way, is going to be coming from here, just continuing this line of stitching at 5/8 of an inch out to the corner, and then at that 5/8 turning and heading down. Okay, so now with this stitch done, I need to push all these seam allowances down, out of the way down here. And again, starting at this point where this seam ended, I need to come up at 5/8, you know, and carry through all the way around like this, and then ending at this same point on the other side of the collar. Okay, so before I turn this, I am going to clip my corners of my collar, come up here with my pinking shears and pink across the top of it. I'm looking at the instructions and they don't mention understitching anywhere, so we're not going to do that. But what I'm going to do right now is very carefully, actually, to flip this back, I need to trim the bulk out of this corner here in the lapel area. And then I'm going to flip everything right side out. Now at this point here, there's a lot of bulk there, some puckering. So before I turn this, I'm actually going to trim it down as best I can to get all of this out of here, just so that a little bitty angle right there isn't puckered. If you turn it and it looks like something's grabbing or something's puckered, chances are it's just extra bulk that's hampering its position. So let me go ahead and finish trimming basically everything down to about 1/4 inch with a pinked edge down there. Okay, so after I'm trimmed it, I'm just gonna try to pull everything out. This is the upper collar, or this is the collar up here. And then down below, I should be able to poke out the little lapel. I've just got my little rounded tip of my little metal chopstick in there. I feel like there's a little bit of bulk in here I might trim out. But by trimming all that stuff out, you can see that this angle is going to lay nice and flat. Involved here, so I'm going to very carefully go over to my ironing board and try my best to get a nice flat edge on this whole seam, you know, from here all the way down. So over here at my ironing board, I'm going to pull her out. The way that I'm working this is just one little section at a time, making sure I get my edge as close to the edge as possible, but still slightly turned under because I don't want to see where that seam is. Okay. I can understand why they didn't do understitching, because then if you did, when the lapel turns over, you would see it, but you know. So I'm hovering over it with a little steam, double checking it looks good, coming back one more time, and then putting my block on top and just pressing and holding it. And I'm just going to hang out here, you know, maybe for a little less than a minute or so, just so it can get used to its new position. This block is going to give me the ability to press it for a long period of time without hurting the fabric, but also it's going to absorb some of that moisture and everything. So once I feel, okay, I'm confident, I can move it, then I have a nice crisp trained edge there, and I'm just going to move up to the next one. But be careful up here when you're pressing, because you don't want to destroy this crease in the undercollar that worked so hard for. So just up here, just make sure you're only working on the edge of the collar. So now I'm up here at the top, and you know, we're kind of doing this over and under thing. So at this point, I kind of want my seam line to roll towards me, so it is slightly visible on this side, because now that it's on the bottom of the collar, this is the side that's going to be invisible. So over here, I don't want it. I want it to roll towards the bottom. Over here, I want it to roll towards the top. And that's why that undercollar was kind of stretched, because that helps it want to naturally come that way. So I don't know if you can see, it's my seam line is just slightly on this side. I need to get my needle and thread here and come inside the lining and the other. And up here at the collar, I have this point where here's my collar, here's my undercollar, my overcollar. I need to stitch these two together, okay? So I'm just going to pin them at the shoulders. Doesn't give too much information, but this is how I see it. I've pressed this seam allowance open, I've pressed this seam allowance open. I am going to put them together with their associated pressed openness and pin them at the center point. I have a center notch there and a center seam here I can match. And over here at a shoulder seam, I'm going to match. And what I'm going to be doing is just by hand, and they say to do it loosely, which to me, I'm just going to do a running stitch from this point, slightly in the seam allowance, but close to the stitching line, all the way across here between the shoulder seams, but paying attention to where everything is matching up. And what that's going to do is hold your collar closed. If you don't hold your collar closed, it will flap open, and that won't be good. So I'm going to start over here at this shoulder, just slightly in the seam allowance, and just do a loose running stitch back and forth, not jerking it really tightly, and that way afterwards I can let these seam allowances fall down where they want to naturally, and hopefully there won't be any puckering. Okay, so now that is done, I am pulling my jacket inside out here. I still don't have the hems down here done or anything like that, but I need to tack the lining. See all my puckers? That's okay, I don't care. I need to tack the top of my lining to the jacket underneath and the bottom down here. Okay, so I'm just going to stick a pin through this seam and see how close it comes to the seam line on the other side. Whoa, not even close. Okay, I need to move it over right there. That's where it comes out. So now that I have this pin basically going straight down from seam line to seam line, I'm going to tuck it in. It's into my shoulder pad. If you don't have shoulder pads, it'll be tucked into the seam allowance, and I'm just going to make a little loose bar tack here, and doing the same thing on the bottom, tack it into the seam allowance down here on both of my sleeves. Okay, so as I'm tacking this, thought I would mention that in hindsight, should I have made a mock-up of this jacket? Absolutely I should have. Would it have saved time in the long run with my fitting issues? Absolutely it would have. I didn't because I was so darn excited and anxious to use my buttonhole maker that I skipped that whole process. Was that a good idea? No, it was not. But you know what? We're going to survive. And that is the thing, is that sometimes, I think I need more thread here, but sometimes even when you don't make a mock-up and things aren't exactly right, it's okay. It's still survivable. So, but if you're going to make this jacket, highly recommend a mock-up because of, wow, so many fitting things. Okay, so the last thing I need to do on this top part here is deal with the sleeve lining and attaching that to the sleeves of my jacket. So they had you press under the lining 5/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to start with my seam. If I can find you in here, seam, there you are. Starting with the seam, what I need to do is bring that up and pin it. I'm going to pin it just below where my serging is so that that serging is not visible. And pin it, usually put the pin in here like that to hold it. Do the same thing across the way, and then just whip stitch it. Actually, it might be easier if I turn this inside out here. Hang on a second. Okay, this will make it a lot easier looking at it this way. So I've got it pinned down here. I'm just going to pin it all the way around. And again, if it's too small, take out a couple stitches over where the seam line is to give it a little more flexibility. And then I'm just going to be whip stitching it right here all the way around. I'm going to do that for both of the sleeves. When I'm done with that and you go to pull it on, this is going to actually make like a little fold, a little pleat like that. That's what it's supposed to do. You know, that gives you a little bit of wiggle room when you put it on. So let me go ahead and start stitching. Okay, so the last thing I need to do is sew my lining to my jacket at the sleeve cuffs here. Well, the last thing I need to do at this stage, but my lining is too narrow to attach at this point, so I'm opening up almost 1/2 inch worth of stitches so that it will be able to go all the way around nice and smoothly. If yours is a little tight, you may need to do that also. I'm putting it so that the edge of my lining, which is folded under and pressed at 5/8 of an inch, is going to be laying right below that serging. Okay, so the serging will be hidden, and I'm just going to whip stitch it all the way around, just going through the one layer of fabric so it's not seen on the outside for both of my sleeves. Okay, so moving on to the peplum now. There is a line on the pattern right here, and I need to cut a piece of interfacing just from that point down. So I've got those pieces here. I'm going to fuse them to the front. This is it's like a facing area here. This is going to get folded over like that. So I need to fuse these to my two pieces. This is the front peplum, and then there's a separate piece for the back. So let me go do that, and I'll be right back. Actually, while I'm over at the ironing board, it doesn't say to do this in the instructions, but because it's a circle thing, I am going to be putting fusible stay tape around here. It doesn't say to stay tape it, it doesn't say to stay stitch it. I just think at this point, I want to make sure I have as few other issues as possible. So I'm going to fuse stay tape around here and on the back piece. You know, it's another circle piece. So, okay, so this is the stay tape that I'm using. It's one I bought off of Etsy. I'm sorry I don't have a more substantial supplier to link to this. At some point I will find one that I can actually link and one that I can actually recommend that's easy to use, but for right now I bought one off Etsy. I believe I have it noted somewhere in the description possibly. With that fused up here around the inside edge, I'm going to fold it so that this is going to match up fairly well. Actually, I almost forgot, before I stitch this, I needed to finish off this edge. So I didn't want to do anything really fancy, so what I did is just serged it, you know. I think that's good enough for right now. So serging this rough edge here, which is basically this edge, then fold it and then baste it up here. Okay, now that I have this basted up here, I'm going to go ahead and serge the top, down the side, and around the bottom of both of these front pieces, you know, just because things fray at this point. And then there's a back piece, which is very similar, except for it's cut on a fold here. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is fusing my stay tape up here, and then going ahead and serging around this one big piece. This is, since it's not cut on a fold. It is not cut on a fold. These are two separate back pieces. So I will be putting my stay tape and serging all the way around both of these back pieces also. So now I am going to sew together my center back pieces, and I am doing the version that has a lower peplum in the back, so I can easily tell what's my center back because it's a lot longer than my side seams, you know. So I have my stay tape, I've got my serging done. I'm just going to sew this at a regular 5/8 inch seam allowance and then press these open. Okay, so here's that seam all pressed open, and now I'm going to sew my front pieces on. So again, putting them right sides together, so my little flap thing is exposed up here at the top. Just matching up these side seams, 5/8 inch, press it open. I'll be right back. Alrighty, so I'm going to match this up, or at least try to. So I have my peplum here, right side up. I'm going to get my jacket, open it up and pull the lining out of the way there. And up here in the very front, I'm going to match it up with the peplum right there. Then after I get the fronts, oops, come back here, little pin. Once I get the fronts matched up, I'm going to match up the side seam. And then once I have that matched up, I'm going to match the center back and get all of those landmarks pinned together, and then I'm going to see how it all works in between. Okay, it looks like it's actually going to match up pretty well. This is my front piece here. I am glad I did the stay tape, you know, because things have a tendency to stretch out of proportion. And I know I have not done the backs of my bound buttonholes yet. I'm going to wait until I have my buttons on my peplum. Oh my gosh! I need to put my buttons on my peplum before I do this. Okay. Yeah, I really need to do this. Put the buttonholes on the peplum before I do this. In the instructions, they say do your buttonholes last, but you know, they're just talking about regular machine buttonholes. And since I'm doing the bound ones, that will not work. So here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a couple little pins over here so I remember which side needs the buttonholes, because that would be terrible. This is my side with buttonholes, so I need them down here. So I'm going to unpin it from all the way around here, get my bound buttonhole maker, get my little 2.5 inch interface squares like I did before. You don't need to see me do that again. But the way that I am going to place them is on the pattern. On the pattern there is placement. So I'm going to punch out a hole at the beginning and end of these, and just so I can see that line. Okay. Now this is the fold line here, laying the edge of my fabric underneath at that fold line down there. These are my dots that I need to put my buttonhole marks on. So let me grab a pencil really quick. Okay, so just like last time, I'm going to mark it on the wrong side, and then once I have all of my lines, I'm going to those with my white thread, so it will be very on the other side. So this is the wrong side. Here's my little facing thing. So I put my 2 dots that I transferred over from my pattern. I'm actually going to use my red because it here's the thing, the white chalk, it works, but it kind of tends to drag. This has a roller on the end, it does not drag, so that is what is making me happy right now. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I need to draw this line here. And remember, I drew one at the very beginning of my buttonholes. And my buttons are 1 inch, so 1 inch in from there. With my ruler, I can place it here. And I have another line. Okay, so I'm going to thread trace all these 2 lines, so I can see them from the right side. Okay, so I've got my little squares, I got my little tool, I got my thread marks all good. So I will be back in a jiffy. Let me tell you about this project. This project is frustrating to me, not because I don't understand it. It's because everything that I mess up, I should have known better, and I do know better. But for some reason, sometimes your mind just kind of turns off and you stop paying attention. And last night was one of those nights. After I realized what I'd done, I just, turned everything off, called it a night up here, and went downstairs. So, got my little scrap here. Let me show you, if you're familiar with bound buttonholes, once you are done with the front, all of the stuff is sticking out the back, right? But there's usually a lining or a facing or something that goes over that hides it in the end. So, you saw me mark it up. I made my, little bound buttonholes. Everything's lovely, but I forgot to make them in such a way that all of this stuff out here is hidden. Okay, so this is basically the edges of all of that stuff I pulled through. And for a second, I ironed it down. I actually fused it on here to try to make it as flat as possible. But if for some reason I'm wearing this jacket unbuttoned and this comes open, do I really want everyone to see this? And the answer is no, I don't. So basically, I'm going to be making from my scrap here a second facing that is going to cover that I'm just going to add over it, hand stitch it on, I'll machine stitch this, flap it over, hand stitch this, serge this, and then I will do the standard openings for the back of a bound buttonhole, which I will show you in detail later. But that's my frustration. I've done so many things to this pattern, and it's probably not that big of a deal, but it's just I know better. I know better. So anyhow, let me go ahead and get this sewn on. What I need to do is actually overlap this just a bit and stitch right along here so that I can fold it up and bring it over, and it's going to match up. So give me a few minutes. You don't need to be really involved with all of this because hopefully you won't make this mistake. Now, if I was doing bound buttonholes correctly, what I would have done, I'll show you on this side because it'll make more sense, is first of all, I would put some interfacing where the buttonholes were going to be on this part. This is the facing, this is the main part. Make the buttonholes here. I'd open this up so I can get to it. Make the buttonholes and then close this and use this part as the facing as it is. I just made them through the entire part. And it's too late to take out now. Okay, so now this is my inside. I just have my little patch. I just invisibly hand stitched it on all the way around, and so then I can come back and make my buttonholes, and I feel better about that now. I was going to leave it exposed, but I think that would have bothered me, and I think it's going to hang just as well on the outside. So win-win. I think it would be a lot easier to go ahead and open up the backs of my buttonholes and get all that finished before I have my jacket attached. So I'm going to open up the backs of down here on the peplum and also on my jacket. So the way that I'm going to do that is I need to be able to mark exactly where these openings are. So I put a straight pin in the very corner of the openings of my bound buttonholes, like that. Okay, so on this side I can see where those positions are exactly, and make a little mark and a little mark. Let me fold that up a bit here. Okay, now I'm just going to do one, and then I'm going to do the same thing that I do for this one for all the others. Okay, so then what I need to do that I can easily pull out, and about 3/4 of an inch or so away, I'm going to baste all the way around, excuse me, just to hold this fabric in place. Do not want it to go anywhere. Some sharp scissors, and I need to cut this opening here just straight from one dot, actually do from the far side of the dot, makes it easier, to the other, and then gently turn it under like that, and I'm going to, with a needle and thread, slip stitch it all the way around, turning it under as I go. So I started it off by just burying the knot in there. I'm going to push it underneath if it will go. It's being obstinate for some reason. Go, little knot. Okay, I will deal with her later. And just going to pick a little bit and come up. And just as I go around, I'm going to tuck it under. It's easier for me to do that than to try to get everything tucked under and pinned ahead of time. So just use my little needle to tuck it in. Come out here to the edge. Before I actually do all of the corners, I need to grab one of my buttons and make sure I have it open enough for a button to go through. And I do. So we're good. So let me just do a couple stitches at the little corners of the smile of my button over here to hold it, and then start down this side and just go all the way around. Okay, so that's how it's looking on the outside now. So I'm just going to unpick and pull out my basting stitches and go on to the next one. Okay, so finally I have my buttonholes all done, and I have it pinned, my peplum to my jacket. Now I can see that there's a couple places, like along this line, where I may want to make some clips so it'll lay nice and flat when I'm stitching it. But just this project being what it is, I am going to baste it on by hand with matching thread first, all the way across, basting it somewhat near my stitching line so I can pull these pins out, make sure everything looks good, make those clips where I need to before I go to my sewing machine. Okay, so now that I have it all hand basted on, you can kind of see where I'm talking about that there's a little bit of easing. It matches up very well at the seam line, it's just up here that it doesn't. And because of that, I am not going to make any clips. I'm going to do my best to sew it just as is. I am going to be putting the jacket part on the bottom, the peplum part on the top as I sew, and just try to make a nice sturdy stitch straight across there so that everyone will lay nicely. That is the goal. Let me go ahead and do that. And out here, if you can see, this is my peplum on top, this is my jacket. My jacket I have placed just barely out farther from it, you know, less than a 1/16 of an inch, just a little bit, so that when I do turn it, there's enough space for all of that hefty seam allowance to fit inside there, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this at 5/8 of an inch. All right, so I just stitched it on and making sure there's no puckers, and I don't see any, so that is good. So now on the inside here, I'm going to go to my ironing board and press this entire seam I just sewed up into the jacket area, pressing it up all the way across. Okay, so this is kind of the general shape we have. It's kind of reminding me of like a riding jacket or something at this point. I think we're okay to go ahead and stitch the lining to the jacket, whip stitch it closed. And one thing about this pattern, and I saw it when I was cutting it out, but I ignored it, is that these dart placement, you know, I lowered it, which is good, because if I hadn't, it would have been way up here, which would have not worked for me. Just seems like they're too close to the middle, and that's how it was on the pattern. You know, we're going with it and everything, but they just seemed a little close in the middle. So we'll see how it turns out in the end. If it still looks too tight when I'm wearing it, well, you know, you can always just move the whole thing out an inch if you need to. All right, so just going to take my time, grab a stitch from down here where my seam is, come up, catch the edge of my lining, and sew on and so forth, just to hold it there nice and securely all the way across. Alrighty, so it's strategy time here. You know, I got my lining all slipped together and I actually put it on. And there's something wrong with this whole front. And what it is if I take this side and overlap it enough that I have a button here for this side, okay? It's like it's too condensed, and the whole issue with the peplum lays wrong. It overlaps each other enough so that you don't get the effect that I wanted, which was, you know, I keep going back to it, but more like this, where the peplum hangs nice and low and it's matching. So I'm gonna modify this a little bit because, like I said, it feels like these darts are too close to the middle. What I am going to do is open it up and put it so that it's going to basically just match up in the middle, and that then the peplum can hopefully just lay like this. And I think that that is going to give me a better look. It just was not right, you know? And so what I'm going to be doing, if I can figure it all out, is using my fox buttons here. I'm going to be doing a double button where I have one here and I'm going to connect it with a little chain to another button. This one will be permanently attached over here. This one's going to be attached to a chain so that that one can get buttoned over here. Okay, so I think that's what I'm going to do at this point. I'll let you know once I get my chain out here and I start playing with it. Okay, so let me tell you what I have come up with here. I've done the top two buttons, just trying to feel it all out here. And so when it's all done, it's going to look like that. So what I'm using is I have some of these little metal flowery chain bead kind of things from the bead aisle at Joann's. And what I'm doing is I am taking 3 of those little deals and with a jump ring connecting that to the shank of a button. And this is what's going to get buttoned through my buttonhole. Now the little flower I am sewing on behind the spot where my button is going to go. So if I stick a pin through here, that is going to show me the spot where I need to start sewing on my chain. So I'm just going to slip that on there. So I'm just with a needle and thread, I'm going to securely stitch around this little flower here, hold it into place, okay? Once that is done, then I can sew the button on this side over here and just kind of lock it into place. There's not really going to be a lot of strain on this button because it's just decorative, but at the same time I don't want it to fall off. So I'm just going to put it on with a few stitches, tie it off, and that is how I'm doing it. Okay, so I think this is going to work here. Now one thing, I tried it on, fits well. The darts, because on this bodice it was a very wide bottom dart, you know. Let me see if I can find that piece. Here it is. It's just, instead of like 2 darts or something, it was just one extremely wide bottom dart. So just be aware what that's going to kind of do is give you kind of a torpedo boob. You know, it's not exact, it doesn't come to a big point, but it's very, from the bottom, it's like whoosh, it sticks out, and you'll see. But it fits me and it's comfortable, so there you go. But if you are doing this, one thing I would point out is it just feels like there needs to be a hook or something at the waistband. You know, it's not pulling, but it's just because that point is such a defined location, it just feels like there should be something there. But because I'm doing it this way and I have some movement, I can't put just a hook there, you know, because it wouldn't work. So, you know, it's going to be fine for what I'm doing, but if you're doing it and it's overlapping or something, you know, you might want to put a snap. And the other thing is, by doing my buttons this way, if at a later time I change my mind and I do want to overlap and button it, I can, because I have these buttons here. These will just dangle in the background and sound like bells as I walk. So the very last thing I need to do is the bottom hem. So almost done, so excited. What I need to do is open up my facing and turn it so it is wrong side out. Hang on, let me get this out of the way here. I'm going to do this on both sides, and I'm going to give myself actually a fairly small hem, about a 1-inch hem. So what that means is, with this turned, you know, along this fold line right here, let me stick a pen up here just to hold it in place. And I'm going to draw myself a line just so I can be very sure that I'm doing the same thing on both sides. Come on, pen. I'm going to draw a line at 1 inch. Okay. So I'm going to sew this, and I'll do the same thing on the other side, at 1 inch like this. Trim this corner and flip it right side out. All right, so I've got it sewed here. I'm just going to trim that corner down there to reduce bulk and flip it right side out. And after I do that, this is going to be at a 1 inch space here for a hem. So let me go ahead and get these pressed. Get my handy dandy chopstick to poke out that corner. And I'm going to very carefully press both of these corners that I just turned first. I'm not pressing this yet. Okay, so to hem this now, I have my corners pressed out, and I am going to be using stretch lace. As I do, this color is called Slate, so I'm hoping that it matches fairly well. And if you've never seen stretch lace hems before, they are fabulous for very curved, circular kind of hems. All right, so here's my little corner. I'm actually opening it back up again because I need to be able to sew my lace on. So I use a regular straight stitch as I'm sewing. And what I'm going to do is put it on the right side. Okay, this is the right side here, and there's a little groove, if you can see, right along the sides. That's where I'm going to be running my straight stitch, right down that groove. I'm going to be putting the edge of the fabric, you know, right around the center of my lace that I can see through there. And as I sew it, I'm stretching it, okay? And what that's going to do is when you release the tension, it gathers it a little bit underneath there, so that then when you go to turn it on a circular hem, it works like a dream. So I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, just lay this here, sew, stretch, all the way around the bottom of my circular hem. All right, so at this point I have it sewed on. As you can see, just a straight stitch there, but you know, I stretched it as I sewed it, so you can see it's kind of making a little dip here. It wants to make that curve. That is what I want. So it looks like if I place it so that I'm using this point right here as a guide, if I place it so that from the bottom of my stretch lace, I have about 3/8 of an inch to the bottom, that's going to give me a uniform hem. So I am just going to put a pin there, and I'm eyeballing it, you know, every few inches. I'll put a pin, and then I'm going to come back and iron it so that it's going to want to hold that nice crease, and everything's going to lay nice and flat before I come back to stitch it. All right, I got it all pressed and pinned, and now I am going to hand stitch this on. I will be stitching it up at the top row of my stretch lace and just doing a little catch of just a single thread or so of my fashion fabric, so that hopefully it will be pretty much invisible. Okay, so I am almost done here. As you can see, I'm just picking up a thread, going down about 1/4 inch, picking up another one, just kind of stitching straight along that little top ridge, making sure I'm not cinching it up too much. After this, there is only one more little piece to this jacket, and it is optional. I want to show it to you. It is this little belt right back there, and she has it on this jacket. It's just a separate little piece that you put a couple buttons on. I think I'm going to go ahead and make it up and place it on there with the buttons. If I don't like it, I can just clip those threads and it will come off. I'm not going to make buttonholes. I'm just going to sew it on with buttons, and it'll give the impression of buttonholes. So to make this up, I have 2 of these ovals cut out and a piece of interfacing. So I'm going to go ahead the ironing board and fuse my piece of interfacing to one of my sides. Okay, so now I've got them right sides together, the 2 pieces of fabric, the interfacing at the end, and I'm just going to sew all the way around, well, leaving a space in the middle. So I'll start right here, go around to like right about here, sew it at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so I have got it sewed here at the beginning of my opening. I'm just going to trim all the way around. Well, you can probably see it better on this side, okay? Trimming around, giving myself a fairly small pinked seam allowance so I can flip this thing right side out. Okay, so with it flipped right side out, I'm going to carefully press it nice and flat and tuck my little opening that I have there to the inside as I press it. Now I'm just going to get my little needle and thread one more time and close up that opening. So before I go to my jacket, I want to mark the very center of this so I can line that up with my center back seam. So I just brought my dress form over here. I'm setting it more on the bodice part than on the peplum part, so the bottom of my belt is kind of at the bottom of, or at just a little bit below that seam line. So hopefully it will cover it up. So I have this matched up at my center back, so I'm just coming over here, gonna pin this side over where it looks like it needs to be, which is just a little bit past this seam here, and this one. So let me set it out here, make sure it looks fairly straight, and I think it does. So I'm just going to go ahead, get, excuse me, these 2 buttons and sew them on like that just to hold it in place. Okay, so I hope you can see. Here is that band I put on. I have a low peplum. Let me tip the camera down so you can get that angle a little better. So you can see I've got a lower peplum right here, which is really nice. Here when I turn it, profile shot, I lift up the sleeve here, maybe you can see a little better. This is that extreme bust, but you know what? It's going to work. So with all of that, then I turn around to the front. We get a good view of the collar right here, okay? It's a nice collar. It's not too big. I like that. And then again, I have my little chains connecting everything here. Now you can see, even though it's not like pulling, it's not like it's super tight, it just feels like there should be something at that seam. The pattern doesn't call for it. I didn't put anything there, but you know, it can't hurt. But coming together very well. It's all done. Finally, it reminds me of, like I think mentioned, like a writing jacket or something that you might see Lady Mary wearing or something. So I really like it. All done, and you know, after all of the drama and all of the turmoil, it turned out really cute. It is very comfortable. I have enough room in my arms to move around. Happy about that. And like I said halfway through, if you're looking for like a very short Spencer jacket kind of pattern, this is it. Just don't put the peplum on. It's adorable and it's fitted just how I would like that. A thing I would change, you know, in addition to all the other changes I made in the construction, when I was putting it together, it did not call for any understitching, and I would understitch the very back of the collar. Just do that first before you do the sides and everything, because there's no top stitching or anything in the very back. It kind of is acting like it wants to curl. It's not curling, but it's acting like it could if it wanted to, and I don't like that. So I would make that change. But I think it came together very well, and I am so thankful that this fabric, which is a very high quality suiting wool, was so agreeable, because I think if I was dealing with a finicky fabric on top of all of my pattern mishaps and my own foibles, that would have been, you know, a cause for drinking, but it wasn't. The fabric worked well. You know, wool is always a fabulous standby. So, yeah, it's good. Now, I am thinking of making the skirt. I might take a break, do something in between, and then make the skirt. I haven't decided that yet, but I just wanted to show you. I just threw on my black leggings and boots because it's kind of like a riding type jacket to me at this point, so I wanted to show you that. But it's cold out here. It's just starting to snow again, so I'm going to bring the camera inside, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye. I'm pausing for my camera. Maybe edit this out.
Living my bucolic life, every city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses in to the barn, then time to move them out again. Red parchment pastures, beautiful my houses.
Okay, I'm putting that in the extras.
The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.